Hey everyone, per your requests, I'm starting Sword of Coming, chapters 331 through 340 of the previous episode. At Sword Water Villa, Qian Pingyan hones his martial arts under a crushing waterfall. When an army besieges the villa, he loyally assists Sword Saint Song Yuxiao, using his flying swords and talismans to capture the enemy general and rout the forces without taking a life. During a 2-month Kuan ship voyage, Qian rigorously practices his fist techniques. Arriving at Old Dragon City, he befriends wealthy merchant Sun Jiashu and casually reveals his past near-fatal clash with the city's powerful heir, Fu Nanhua, leaving Sun utterly astounded. If you're able to, please support me on PayPal to help me stay active. Thank you. Now let's get back to the story of Sword of Coming audio series. A slightly displeased look appeared on Sun Jiashu's face. In that case, why is that Lu Baqiao made it sound like the two of you had been through 100 battles of life and death together in his letter? He told me that you were one of a kind and the most brilliant person that he'd ever met, and that if I didn't treat you right, he would cut all ties with me, then spread his nickname for me across the entire Eastern Treasured Vile continent. Is your nickname grandson? Qian Pingyan asked. Sun Jiashu slapped a hand to his own forehead with a wry smile as he sighed. Was it that obvious? Qian Pingyan smiled as he replied. I may have only met Lu Baqiao twice, but I'm familiar with his sense of humor. Sun Jiashu heaved a faint sigh upon hearing this. When it comes to me and Fu Nanhua, even if we remain friends for decades, we'll never be too close. In contrast, you and Lu Baqiao already seem to be very close friends, even after only 2 meetings. Right at this moment, the coach driver appeared in the distance. Sun Jiashu turned around to take a glance at him, then said to Qian Pingyan, I have to go to the inner city to meet a guest in our Sun Manor. I agreed to meet them at this time, so I have to go. At the very latest, someone will tell you the location of the dust medicinal shop by tonight. Also, seeing as you're a sworn enemy of Fu Nanhua's, make sure you send someone to notify me before you go out anywhere, and I'll have someone accompany you for safety. Seeing as the Fu clan's treasure-swallowing whale is not a feasible option for you, you may as well take our mountain and sea turtle to Stalactite Mountain. It's set to depart in 20 days, and you can stay here in our ancestral residence during this time. If you want something, I can arrange for it to be brought to you as long as it can be found in Old Dragon City. Don't be shy to ask. If you can't bring yourself to do so, you can tell yourself that Sun Jiashu is really rich anyway, and friends should stick together through thick and thin, so he should share some of his wealth with you. Otherwise, it would be a waste to be his friend. Alright, in that case, I'll accept your kind offer, Qian Pingyan replied with a smile. By the way, that quote is from Lu Baqiao, right? Sun Jiashu immediately gave Qian Pingyan a thumbs up in response. No wonder Lu Baqiao was so insistent that I become friends with you. You truly understand him. With that, Sun Jiashu departed with the old coach driver, and the two of them traveled by carriage to the inner city of Old Dragon City. Qian Pingyan was left on his own, and he began to practice his walking meditation by the river. The still and calm river, the boundless expanse, the ordinary dirt road. If it weren't for the absence of the stone arch bridge in Ruanqiong's forge, he would have thought that he was back in his hometown. Qian Pingyan practiced his walking meditation for close to 10 kilometers, until he arrived at a small village set beside the river. There were clucking chickens, barking dogs, and plumes of smoke rising up out of chimneys. Qian Pingyan stopped in his tracks, then looked around to find that there was a small wooden bridge beside him that led to the other side of the river, and for some reason, he felt as if he were in another life. Qian Pingyan was just about to turn around and make his way back to the Sun clan's ancestral residence when he noticed a group of young children dressed in plain and simple clothes emerging from the rapeseed blossom farm across the river. Most of them at the age where they could start attending school, and there was an even younger child trailing along behind them with snot flowing out of his nostrils. A couple of the older boys were holding crude wooden swords that had presumably been carved out by their seniors, and they seemed to be holding a contest of swordsmanship. They made their way through the fields one after the other while hacking away at the rapeseed blossoms in their path, and making a series of loud noises to make themselves sound like mighty warriors. The poor rapeseed blossoms were hacked to pieces by the 2 older children, and right at this moment, one of the younger children behind them suddenly erupted into tears. Initially, he had been quite cheerful, but all of a sudden, he had realized that this rapeseed blossom field belonged to his family, and if his parents were to see what had happened here, there was no way that he would be able to escape a beating. However, he didn't dare to get in the way of the 2 older kids, so he could only bawl his eyes out. Thankfully, one of the older kids quickly realized the trouble that they were in, and he pulled out a piece of candy made by his family and offered it to the child as consolation. The child's tears instantly gave way to a wide smile, and he continued to follow along behind the two older kids, watching with admiration as they continued to lash out with their swords. At the same time, he was thinking to himself that once he became a little older and stronger, he was going to ask his father to make him a sword as well. Once he obtained a sword of his own, he would cut down all of these rapeseed blossoms. That was just about the most badass thing that he could think of. The pretty little girl from the neighbor's house always liked to play with another boy, but once he became a formidable swordsman, he was confident that she would abandon that boy in a heartbeat to be with him. Qian Pingyan was very amused by what he was seeing. This was exactly like a scene taken from his childhood. Back then, Lu Xianying was always going around causing trouble. Not only did he like to hack away at rapeseed blossoms with his wooden sword, he would also go on rampages through other fields or pelt stones at the ducks in the river. For his misbehavior, he was constantly scolded and beaten by the women in the small town. After that, both he and Qian Pingyan became kiln workers, and he began to rein in his misbehaving ways as those activities no longer interested him. Instead, he liked to go up into the mountains to catch snakes and wild chickens. However, the people of the small town didn't get any respite as Guqin immediately took up Lu Xianying's mantle, getting up to all types of mischief in his stead. The only difference was that as opposed to Lu Xianying's blatant misbehavior, Guqin was far more sly and alert, and he was almost never caught in the act. He possessed willpower and persistence that even Qian Pingyan admired, as well as cunning and craftiness unbefitting a child of his age. Even under the hot and blazing sun, Guqin could sit by the river the entire day just to fish up an eel. Whenever a mealtime came around, Guqin's mother would call her son to come and eat, and her voice would be heard throughout the entirety of Clay Vase Alley. Qian Pingyan squatted down beside the river and began tossing rocks into the water. Meanwhile, the group of children made their way across the bridge in a long line, and their heads resembled a stick of tonghulu. The children weren't apprehensive of Qian Pingyan at all, despite the fact that he was an unfamiliar face, and they only took a few glances at him before making their way toward the nearby village. However, one of the children, who was holding a bamboo sword, was constantly looking back at Qian Pingyan, taking particular interest in the sword case on his back. In the end, he was unable to suppress his curiosity, and he rushed over to Qian Pingyan's side before asking in the official dialect of Eastern Treasured Vile Continent, "Are you a swordsman?" Qian Pingyan rose to his feet with a smile as he replied, "That's right. Are you a swordsman as well?" The child rolled his eyes in response to what he perceived to be a very naive question, and he replied, "I'm still missing a secret sword scripture." "Me too," Qian Pingyan said with a nod as he suppressed the urge to laugh. The boy took a glance at the bamboo sword in his hand, then turned his gaze to the sword case on Qian Pingyan's back as he asked, "Can you show me your sword?" "No," Qian Pingyan refused with a shake of his head. The boy was very displeased to hear this, and he took a glance at the wine gourd strapped to Qian Pingyan's waist as he scoffed, "You're so stingy. I bet you're not even a swordsman at all. In fact, I think that gourd of yours contains water instead of wine, and you're just carrying it around to fool others. Have you seen a true swordsman before?" Qian Pingyan asked. The boy nodded vigorously in response. There was a little girl with rosy cheeks behind him, and she said in a timid voice, "The furthest we've gone is the market a few dozen kilometers away, so there's no way we would have met any swordsmen." Another child immediately chimed in a truthful manner, "All we've seen are some poems describing swordsmen at school, and there are also some books being sold in the market with little figures drawn on them. Those books are really expensive, and the swordsmen drawn on them are always really strong. None of the bad guys can beat them." The boy who had proclaimed that he had seen a true swordsman in the past turned around with a stern glare, and the two children behind him immediately fell silent. The other bamboo sword-wielding boy also approached Qian Pingyan as he asked, "How strong is your swordsmanship?" Qian Pingyan was rather stumped by this question, and in the end he could only reply, "I've seen really powerful swordsmen in real life, not just in the books that you mentioned." The boy was completely unconvinced by this, but the other sword-wielding boy was very intrigued to hear this, and he asked, "Did you learn any swordsmanship from them? If you can show me some of your swordsmanship, then I'll believe that you're a true swordsman. If you convince me, then I'll be your disciple. I want to learn swordsmanship from you. Not just cutting up rapeseed flowers. I want to be able to cut that bridge in half with a single swing of my sword. If you can teach me that, then I'll accept you as my master right now." Qian Pingyan could barely contain his own amusement. Unbeknownst to Chen Ping'an, the plot of land surrounding the Sun Clan's ancestral residence was a renowned paradise in Old Dragon City, and even though most of the people living here were ordinary villagers who had been residing here for generations, there were also some powerful figures that had been secretly planted among them, looking after this sacred land for the Sun Clan to ensure that it wasn't damaged by outsiders. Not only was Chen Ping'an oblivious to this, all of the villagers were also kept in the dark, and they merely regarded these powerful cultivators as fellow villagers no different from themselves. Aside from the two elderly figures in the Sun Clan's ancestral residence, there was also a logger who lived on his own in a thatch hut up in the mountains, as well as an elderly man who had a large family with generations of descendants. They were all truly formidable cultivators, with 3 of them at the Golden Core tier and 1 of them at the Nascent tier. Some of them were patriarchs of side branches of the Sun Clan, some were powerful figures who had come here to hide from past troubles, and of course there were also some who had been hired by the Sun Clan. Even the services of powerful immortals could be purchased for the right price. At this moment, the 4 powerful chi refiners were gathered in front of the logger's thatch hut. With a casual sweep of the logger's hand, a cloud of mist emerged to form a screen, upon which an image of Chen Ping'an was displayed, and the 4 of them were placing bets on his cultivation base. One of them theorized that seeing as he was friends with Lu Baqiao, he had to be an exceptionally prodigious swordsman. He proclaimed that Chen Ping'an had to be at least a cave abode tier swordsman, and that his fist intent was just for show. Someone else disagreed, speculating that Chen Ping'an was still yet to reach the middle 5 tiers, while the other 2 were bickering over whether he was a 4th or 5th tier martial artist. One of them speculated that he was a 4th tier martial artist with an exceptional foundation, as opposed to a normal 5th tier martial artist. He declared that not only was Chen Ping'an an outstanding prodigy, he had definitely also been instructed by a brilliant master from a young age, and that he was a young prodigy from a wealthy clan who had been given the best cultivation resources from birth, even going as far as to speculate that he could be from one of those vastly renowned clans that had been standing for thousands of years, and possessed comparable wealth to an entire nation. Despite the bickering that was taking place, the 4 cultivators were clearly thoroughly enjoying each other's company. Once again, the perverted man from the small medicine shop inside the inner city had come out to sit at the entrance of the alley atop his small stool. However, he hadn't brought any sunflower seeds on this day. Instead, he was reading a book that had been bought by one of the female employees of the shop, and the book contained many stories about the feats and teachings of Confucian and Taoist sages. Of course, the man had no actual interest in reading about these things. Instead, the reason why he had decided to bring this book was because he had been squatting at the entrance of the alley for a very long time without any female attention directed his way, so he thought that perhaps what he was missing was some scholarly charm. Hence, he was pretending to read this book in the hope that his luck would turn. It was summertime, so the women on the streets were more scantily dressed than during the colder seasons. The man was sitting under the shade of a tree, pretending to read his book, but in reality, his peripheral vision was focused intently on all of the women passing by. Among them was a particularly voluptuous mature woman who instantly captured his heart, and he almost drooled onto the pages of the book in his hand. Unfortunately, he noticed that even though he was holding a book and posing as a scholar, there were still no women willing to take a glance at him. The only exception was one woman, who had come yet again. She had a waist as thick as a water vat and a face that was bigger than the man's arse. A dejected look appeared on the man's face, and for the first time, he began actually reading his book. The young woman lived nearby, and she walked back and forth in front of the man many times, swaying her hips from side to side as she did so, but the man's gaze remained fixed firmly on his book. In the end, the woman was unable to stand the heat of the summer sun, and she took a longing glance at the man of her dreams before setting off back home with a content look on her face. The man was flipping through the pages of the book very quickly, and he suddenly stopped on a certain page, which contained a story in which a Taoist sage had espoused his teachings through an analogy about traveling on a boat. The story told of a man sailing through a river on a small boat. As he was sailing along, another boat came drifting toward him from the opposite direction, and he hurriedly called out to avoid a crash, but the other boat still rammed straight into his boat. He immediately erupted into a torrent of abuse, only to find that there was no one on the other boat, upon which he immediately burst into laughter. Through this story, the sage was trying to espouse the idea that loneliness was what made one exceptional, rather than a blind follower of others, and that loneliness was the key to truly understanding oneself and fulfilling one's true value. The man didn't find this to be nonsensical. In fact, he could understand the true meaning that the story was trying to express, but even so, they didn't serve to benefit him in any way as he was pursuing a different path from this Taoist sage. Back in the small town, he had even gone to the school on many occasions to eavesdrop on Mr. Chi's lessons, and he was able to understand everything there as well, even some of the more profound and intangible concepts, but they did nothing to benefit his cultivation. What was most perplexing to him was that his senior brother had grown up in the same place as him, and all he did every day was perform the menial tasks of an unrefined farmer, yet somehow, he had been able to make constant and steady progress in his cultivation base. After making a trip to Great Sui Nation's imperial palace, he had even managed to reach the 10th tier. Their master would always denounce and scold him, but when his senior brother was mentioned, their master would always praise his aptitude and learning ability. This wasn't enough to make him resent his master or his senior brother. It simply left him feeling rather indignant and confused. This was why he had been living in a very dejected manner all these years, and at this point, he didn't even have the courage and conviction to try and prove his master wrong anymore. Hence, he didn't raise any objections when his master told him to leave the small town to travel to Old Dragon City. The only thing that he was concerned about was that in the absence of Li Er, their master would have no one to praise, and in his absence their master would have no one to scold. All he would be able to do would be to smoke his pipe on his own all day, and that seemed like a very lonesome existence. He had already reached the pinnacle of the 8th tier long ago, yet all he did all day was look after a small medicine shop while flirting with his female employees. His master rarely ever spoke to him, but the one time that he did speak to him in a calm and earnest fashion, it was to tell him that he would never be able to reach the 9th tier in this lifetime. With that in mind, the man closed his book and began using it as a fan. All of a sudden, he picked up his stool before rushing back to the medicine shop in the alley as if he were fleeing from something in a panic. As it turned out, the same woman from before had returned once again, this time having changed into a bright and vibrant dress, and she had resumed her shtick of walking back and forth along the street while swaying her hips from side to side. After rushing back to the shop, the man collapsed into his chair in an exhausted and fearful manner, but all of a sudden, his eyes lit up as he sprang to his feet before laying a hand down onto the chair. Clearly, one of his employees had just sat on it, as evidenced by the residual warmth on the chair. With that in mind, he immediately leaned down and took a whiff of the faint fragrance that lingered on the chair with a blissful look on his face. A resentful look appeared on the face of one of the shop's employees, and she reluctantly pulled out a few copper coins and thrust them into the hands of another employee, then gave the shopkeeper a cold glare. An enlightened look instantly appeared on the man's face. Clearly, the two women had just made a bet to see if his wise and handsome self would be able to detect the residual warmth on the chair. What a pair of cheeky little vixens they were. Right at this moment, a handsome young boy entered the shop. It was clear from his attire that he came from an affluent family. The female employees were unable to tell exactly how affluent his family was, but just as men enjoyed seeing beautiful women, handsome men were also a sight for sore eyes for women, so the handsome boy was naturally a welcome sight. Looking at the bright and excited eyes of his employees, the man immediately sat back down onto his chair in a deflated manner, then asked, "What do you want?" In the presence of the unkempt and disheveled man, the young boy was clearly a little uneasy and restrained, and he pulled over a small stool, then sat down beside the man as he said, "Mr. Zheng, my father has sent me here to ask you when you're going to officially start teaching me fist techniques. A breakthrough from the 3rd tier to the 4th tier isn't something that can be forced. You must be patient," Zheng Dafeng replied in a placating tone. A sullen look appeared on the young boy's face, but he didn't dare to force the issue any further. This entire time, Zheng Dafeng had only taught the young boy the bare basics. In fact, it was no exaggeration to say that he had barely taught the young boy anything at all, and any 5th or 6th tier martial artist could easily impart more knowledge during this time. With that in mind, he was feeling a little guilty, and he lowered his voice as he continued with a serious expression. "We pure martial artists aren't like chi refiners. Those chi refiners like to progress as quickly as possible, and those with exceptional aptitude can even make progress at a rate of a tier a day. However, we can't do that. No matter how outstanding your aptitude is, you must continue to take things one step at a time. There are even times when you know that you can make a breakthrough, but you must fight against it so that you can slowly expel and smooth out all of the impurities and flaws in your body and soul. The medicine that I asked your father to brew for you and that hot spring that he's constructing are all a part of your cultivation. Right now, those are the things that you should be focusing on, instead of trying to strive to reach the qi refining tier as quickly as possible. Zheng Dafeng then smiled as he concluded, "Don't try to fool me, kid. You weren't sent here by your father. You came here of your own accord because you ran out of patience, didn't you?" An embarrassed look instantly appeared on the young boy's face. Progressing from the 3rd tier to the 4th tier was a Herculean task for a martial artist, and that was why it was likened to a clay deity crossing the river. It was entirely a matter of aptitude, and even a 7th tier martial artist wouldn't be able to offer any guidance in this process. An 8th tier martial artist would perhaps be able to point out a shortcut, but generally speaking 8th tier qi refiners were very easy to find, but there were barely any 8th martial artists even across the entirety of Eastern Treasured Vile Continent. Furthermore, almost all of them were desperately sought after by all of the major empires, and barely any slipped through the cracks to end up in Old Dragon City. On top of that, even for the rare few martial artists of this caliber that did end up in Old Dragon City, both the Fu clan and the Sun clan were richer than the young boy's Fan clan, so they were far too low down the pecking order to be able to expect to secure the services of such a master martial artist. Zheng Dafeng gave the young boy a pat on the shoulder as he said, "Be patient, kid. Once you've truly reached the bottleneck of the 3rd tier, I'll be sure to give you the final push that you need. The money that your Fan clan has given me definitely won't go to waste. With my help, even if you want to fail, you can't." The young boy had arrived at the shop full of trepidation and frustration, but he felt a lot more optimistic and assured when he left. This entire time, there had been a golden core tier patriarch looking after him from the shadows. The young boy was an extremely important figure in the Fan clan. From the day that he was born, ownership of one of the Fan clan's Osmanthus Island ships had already been assigned to him, and despite his young age, he already had control over an enormous sum of wealth. As soon as the young boy left, the women immediately turned to the shopkeeper and began asking about who the young boy was and his background. In response to these questions, Zheng Dafeng made a grabbing motion with one hand as his gaze roamed over the women's chests, and he said in a sly manner, "You all know the rules. If you want your questions answered, then you have to show some sincerity. I have answers to any question you may have, including his name, where he lives, whether he likes his women petite or more voluptuous." None of the women took the bait. Zheng Dafeng could only heave a forlorn sigh as he said, "What a pity for all of you. He's a prime bachelor candidate, TSK tisk." The women had departed to discuss the young boy among themselves, paying no further heed to their perverted shopkeeper. Zheng Dafeng laid back in his chair in a comfortable manner as he murmured to himself, "It seems like my luck with women is just as terrible as Chan Pingin's was back in the day. We may be brothers in that regard." Zheng Dafeng had served as the gatekeeper of Jewel Small World, granting entry to outsiders in exchange for pouches of gold essence copper coins, and not long ago, he had received a letter from his master, instructing him to dispel those 4 true Qi 8-tailed talismans for Chan Pingin. However, an instruction had also been tacked onto the end of the letter, stating that if Chan Pingin could make a breakthrough on his own, then Zheng Dafeng was required to ensure that everything went smoothly for him in Old Dragon City. Zheng Dafeng turned to the small alley outside the shop as he murmured to himself, even for a martial arts prodigy like that kid from the Fan clan, he would only be able to carry 1 or 2 true Qi 8-tailed talismans at most. Otherwise it would be too much for his body to bear. Since when did Chan Pingin become so strong that he could handle 4 of them at once? If I recall correctly, it's only been a short time since he started practicing fist techniques. A self-deprecating look then appeared on his face as he continued, "I should have never doubted your judgment, master. My senior brother really does have a sharper eye for talent than I do. Back in the small town, I thought Chan Pingin was a lost cause." All of a sudden, a young woman stormed over to Zheng Dafeng's side, then demanded, "Where's my book, shopkeeper Zheng? Give it back." Zheng Dafeng cleared his throat in a slightly awkward manner, then pulled the book out of his pocket before setting it down onto the counter. "Keep going," the young woman yelled with her face flushed with embarrassment and indignation. Zheng Dafeng could only sheepishly pull out a female undergarment from his pocket as well. The undergarment was scrunched up into a ball in his hand, and he gently set it down beside the book as he explained, "You set your cloth pouch down in such a public place, and a corner of the book was poking out of it. I was a little curious, so I decided to borrow the book. After I pulled out the book, I noticed that your undergarments were a little dirty, so I thought I'd wash them for you out of the kindness of my heart." The embarrassed young woman hurriedly stuffed her undergarments away, then picked up the book before slapping Zheng Dafeng across the face with it as she yelled, "You're a sick pervert! A scoundrel!" Zheng Dafeng caught the book with a serious expression as he protested, You can call me a scoundrel all you like. I know that my intentions were good and pure. Even if you insult me, I can forgive you for your good looks. However, I really did wash your undergarments for you as a gesture of goodwill, and that's something that you can't deny." A chorus of raucous laughter rang out within the shop, interspersed with the woman's enraged insults and the disdainful chattering of the shop employees. All the while, Zhang Dafeng merely sat back in his chair with a smile on his face and his hands tucked behind his head, near the wooden bridge close to the village in the Sun Clan's ancestral paradise. The four cultivators had already done away with the screen that they had been observing Qian Ping'an through. After all, there wasn't much fun in watching a bunch of children bickering back and forth with one another. As for whether Qian Ping'an was a swordsman concealing his identity, or a pure martial artist of the qi refining tier, the four of them were unable to come to a consensus. However, these four were all vastly experienced and knowledgeable cultivators. Old Dragon City was one of the most complex and diverse places on the entire Eastern Treasured Vile continent, and many powerful figures from the 3 continents to the east would often pass through this place. Whenever they did this, most of them were willing to grace the Fu clan and the other 5 major clans with their presence. After all, it couldn't hurt to make friends with such wealthy and powerful clans. Hence, the 4 cultivators had seen a vast array of formidable figures passing through the city, so they weren't all that bedazzled by Qian Ping'an. However, at the same time, all of them were firmly of the opinion that regardless of whether Qian Ping'an was a qi refiner or a pure martial artist, he was most definitely an extraordinary prodigy. Perhaps the next time he visited this place, he would already be a middle-aged man at the Golden Courtier, and they would be treating him as an equal. Alternatively, perhaps he would already be a 7th-tier martial artist that could physically oppose the heavenly Tao, thereby allowing him to take flight. Once that happened, he wouldn't just be a friend of Sun Jiaxu's. Instead, he would be an esteemed guest that all 4 of them would need to greet in person. Beside the river, the children were still trying to goad Qian Ping'an into showing off his swordsmanship, encouraging him to display proof that he was actually a swordsman as he proclaimed, rather than a fraud who pretended to be a heroic figure by carrying a sword case and wine gourd with him everywhere he went. Qian Ping'an was still a child himself, so he was happy to entertain these children, joking around with them instead of chasing them away. Through their conversation he came to discover that these children were very pure and innocent, and they had never even witnessed the true Old Dragon City, let alone any actual swordsman. At the same time, they struck Qian Ping'an as very honest and down-to-earth children. For example, even though one of the bamboo sword-wielding children was berating him with a string of insults, Qian Ping'an could see a hint of hope deep within his eyes. Despite all the skepticism that he had displayed toward Qian Ping'an deep down, he truly hoped that Qian Ping'an was a powerful swordsman who could defeat evil forces and achieve miraculous feats with his sword, just like the figures depicted in the books that he had read. As for the other child, he wanted nothing more than to be able to become the disciple of a powerful swordsman. To that end, he was even willing to kowtow and offer incense to Qian Ping'an. However, before that, he had to verify that Qian Ping'an really was the swordsman that he proclaimed himself to be. All of the other children were also gawking at Qian Ping'an, waiting for him to show off his skills so they could boast to their parents when they went home to eat. "In that case, I suppose I can show all of you a thing or two," Qian Ping'an said with a thoughtful expression. All of the children immediately nodded eagerly in response, while one of the bamboo sword-wielding boys complained, "If you're going to show us something, then stop talking and just do it. I can tell just from how much you're stalling that you're a fraud. You're just afraid that you'll expose yourself, right?" Qian Ping'an burst into laughter, and he reached down to grab his sword-nurturing gourd, but ultimately decided against drinking any wine in the presence of his children. He then turned to the other bank of the river, which was around 15 meters away. "Don't blink," Qian Ping'an warned. The children immediately opened their eyes up wide, eagerly waiting to see what he was going to do next. Qian Ping'an jumped up and down a few times while shaking out his legs. Progressing from the 3rd tier to the 4th tier was likened to a clay deity crossing the river, but in the heat of the moment, Qian Ping'an had completely forgotten about this saying. He slowly raised an arm as he warned once again. "I'm only going to do this once, so make sure you don't miss it." All of the children gave a collective nod. With that, Qian Ping'an reached around his own shoulder to grab onto the locust wood sword in his sword case. He then instantly drew the sword before hurling it toward the other opposite bank of the river, and it tumbled around in midair once before straightening itself out with its tip aimed straight at the other side of the river, but it wasn't flying very quickly. "Here I go," Qian Ping'an declared as he sprang up into the air, landing atop the wooden sword with both feet. Initially, his flight was a little wobbly, but after gaining stable footing atop the wooden sword, he was able to fly across the river as if he were really standing atop a flying sword. He really is a swordsman. He's not a fraud. All of the children were staring at Qian Pingyan with awe and admiration in their eyes. After crossing the river, Qian Pingyan jumped down onto the opposite bank, then caught the locust wood sword before it had a chance to plunge into the ground. Standing in the field of golden rapeseed blossoms, wisps of invisible true qi were slowly disintegrating around his wrists and ankles. Qian Pingyan was astonished by this turn of events, no less so than the flabbergasted children on the other side of the river. After returning to his senses, he turned around to face the children, then pointed a thumb at himself as he declared, "My name is Qian Pingyan and I'm a swordsman." After that, he hurled his locust wood sword in the direction of the Sun Clan's ancestral residence, this time with far more force than before, so the sword was sent racing through the air at a far greater speed. Qian Pingyan sprang up into the air to land on the sword once again, and this time there was no wobbling or unsteadiness. Finally, he was beginning to resemble a true young sword immortal. Once again he crossed the river atop his sword, and his arms were crossed as he raised his head with his eyes closed, basking in a certain profound feeling that was lingering in the air. A gentle breeze was caressing his cheeks, and before he knew it, the clay bodhisattva had already crossed the river, elevating him to the 4th tier. The dust medicinal shop was tucked away deep in the small alley, like a fearful child hiding from a scolding, and the female employees had nothing to do all day aside from dealing with their shopkeeper's unwelcome advances. The shop did barely any business, and even the female employees themselves were rather perplexed about exactly why they had been hired. While it was true that they had to deal with the shopkeeper's constant flirting and ogling, he never actually did anything that crossed the line, and they were paid their wages in full and on time every single month, so they were certainly more than happy to while away the hours at the medicinal shop. In any case, it wasn't like they were going to lose any meat from being ogled at by the shopkeeper. In fact, this was quite a high-paying and low-stress job, and as a result, their living conditions and appetites had all improved, so most of them had actually gained weight, much to their chagrin. On this day, Zhang Dafeng received another spoken message, which had been sent to him by a Yin god that he had left Jewel's small world with. Regardless of how Zhang Dafeng tried to befriend or goad the Yin god, the latter stoically refused to reveal their cultivation base, so Zhang Dafeng remained completely oblivious to just how powerful they were. Old Man Yang had instructed the Yin god to tell Zhang Dafeng 2 things, the first of which was that Qian Pingyan's true qi 8-tailed talismans were already broken, so there was no need for him to remove them. The second thing was that the Dao Mentor and Dao Guardian were both in Old Dragon City, so he had to be vigilant. The first thing was easy to understand, but the second thing had been conveyed very vaguely by Old Man Yang, and before Zhang Dafeng had a chance to ask any questions, the Yin god had already vanished. Zhang Dafeng was left completely perplexed, and he sat down onto the doorstep of the medicinal shop with an absent-minded expression. This had always been weighing on his mind. Old Man Yang had admitted that he was Zhang Dafeng and Li Er's master, but he wasn't their Dao Mentor. Instead, he was the Dao Mentor of Li Er's daughter, Li Lu. As for the identity of the Dao Guardian, Zhang Dafeng was currently serving as Dao Guardian to that young boy from the Feng clan. He had to ensure that the boy progressed smoothly past his 3rd-tier bottleneck, and from there, he had to assist the boy in reaching the spirit-refining tiers. Old Man Yang's attitude toward Qian Pingyan was also rather vague, but there was one thing that Zhang Dafeng was certain of, which was that Qian Pingyan was one of the many people that his master had placed bets on, but he was held in nowhere near as high a regard as Ma Kuxuan, who was blessed by the heavenly Dao. The breathing technique that he had taught Qian Pingyan was only a very rudimentary one, and it really wasn't anything remarkable. However, Zhang Dafeng speculated that due to the incredible progress that Qian Pingyan had been making in his martial arts cultivation, Old Man Yang was slowly beginning to pay more attention to him. Zhang Dafeng's brows furrowed tightly in deep thought as he murmured to himself, "Could it be that he wants me to serve as Qian Pingyan's Dao Mentor or Dao Guardian? Surely not. In the past, whenever he's assigned such duties to anyone, he's always been very straightforward about all of the details such as who he wants, how long he wants them to serve for, and what cultivation base the target has to reach during that time. He would never be so vague about something." Zhang Dafeng interlaced his fingers behind his head as he sighed. "Besides, I don't get along with Qian Pingyan at all. He's such a boring kid. I just can't bring myself to like him. Clearly, Li Er would be a much better fit as Qian Pingyan's Dao Guardian. What on earth are you thinking, Master?" Why can't you just tell me what you want me to do in simple and straightforward terms? If I only have to serve as a Dao guardian for him for a year or two, then I can endure it, but if I have to be his Dao mentor, then you might as well kill me now. An energetic female employee was eating some sunflower seeds, and she turned to Zheng Dafeng with a smile as she asked, "What's gotten you so worked up, shopkeeper?" Zheng Dafeng took a glance at the young woman's flat chest, then said in a displeased voice, "You have to keep up, Xiao He. You've already got the long legs covered, but you have to grow a little bit of meat on your chest to balance out your physique." The young woman was quite bold and easygoing to begin with, and after working at the medicinal shop for so long, she had already grown accustomed to Zheng Dafeng's constant advances, so she didn't even skip a beat as she continued to eat sunflower seeds. "If I want to grow more meat, then I have to eat more, but that requires money. I want to be a bit more voluptuous there, but my limited monthly wage only allows me to eat so much. What can I do? How about you give me a secret pay rise, shopkeeper? I promise that I won't tell any of the others. I'd be a fool if I counted on you to keep a secret." Zheng Dafeng scoffed. "If I give you a pay rise, then tomorrow I'll have to give everyone a pay rise. Do you think money just falls into my lap? I have to work really hard to support all of you, so don't make my job any harder." The young woman sat down onto the doorstep, then intentionally extended her legs out of the shop as she smiled and said, "Isn't there a woman living nearby who's really into you, shopkeeper? She's so voluptuous, isn't she exactly your type? Why do you keep ignoring her? She has more meat up here than all of us girls combined." The young woman gestured to her own chest as she spoke, and Zheng Dafeng grimaced as he waved a hand to chase her away. "A pretty young woman like you shouldn't go around saying such shameless things. Otherwise, you're never going to be able to find a husband. Get back to the shop and sweep the floor." The young woman wasn't willing to move, and she retorted in a justified manner, "Our shop is called the Dust Medicinal Shop. It would hardly live up to its name if I made it too clean." Zheng Dafeng was no match for her in a war of words, so he gave up altogether, cradling the back of his own head with his hands as he laid back to look up at the sky. Other people in the city weren't able to see the sea of clouds up above, but that was not the case for a master martial artist like himself. Celestial tools ranked above immortal tools, but they were extremely rare on Eastern Treasured Vial continent. How rare? Sect Master Qi Zhen of Divine Edict Sect, for instance, had only been granted a celestial tool by the formal sect on Middle-earth Divine Continent after reaching Heavenly Lord status. Due to how far out of reach celestial tools were, all Qi refiners settled for the next best thing, which were pseudo-celestial tools, artifacts somewhere between immortal tools and celestial tools. At the moment, Old Dragon City had 4 pseudo-celestial tools, 2 of which were in the possession of the Fu clan's leader, and both of them were formidable offensive treasures. In contrast, the new one that had been purchased from Middle-earth Divine Continent was a defensive treasure. As for the sea of clouds in the sky above the city, the Fu clan claimed they had always owned it. However, as for whether this was actually the truth and whether this was the Fu clan's true trump card, that was difficult to say for sure. As for that story about the woman who had awakened from the Sea of Clouds 800 years ago to eradicate that army of evil cultivators while wielding the pseudo-celestial tool, that was nothing more than an old wives' tale. For the combination of the woman and the Sea of Clouds to be that formidable, then 2 conditions had to be met. The Sea of Clouds had to be a celestial tool rather than a pseudo-celestial tool, and its wielder also had to be a Qi refiner of the upper 5 tiers. The young man turned to Zheng Dafeng with a curious expression as she asked, "What are you looking at, shopkeeper?" Zheng Dafeng's eyes widened as he turned to her with a serious expression, then replied, "I'm looking to see if there are any scantily dressed celestial maidens flying past in the sky." The young woman rolled her eyes in response. "Be careful they don't piss onto your head. That would be the most divine heavenly elixir," Zheng Dafeng replied as he smacked his lips. "Disgusting," the young woman denounced as she sprang to her feet, while Zheng Dafeng chortled with mirth. The young woman had only just made her way back into the shop when she suddenly turned around and asked, "Shopkeeper, can you hum that tune from your hometown that you were humming last time?" Zheng Dafeng shook his head vigorously in response. "I'm counting on that tune to attract the woman of my dreams, so I can't just hum it for anyone." "Hum it for me," the young woman insisted. "Perhaps I'll become your wife in the future." Zheng Dafeng's eyes immediately lit up, and he was just about to rise to his feet when the young woman sat back down onto the doorstep with a concerned look on her face as she sighed. "I don't think you're ever going to be able to find a woman to marry you if you'll believe in such blatant lies." Zheng Dafeng sat back down in a deflated manner, and after a brief silence, He began whistling the same tune that the young woman had requested, except this time, he wasn't singing the lyrics. The young woman leaned forward slightly so that her chin was resting on her hands as she listened in silence. The lyrics of the song were all in Zheng Dafeng's hometown dialect, so she couldn't understand them anyway. A significant event was about to take place in Old Dragon City. The young city lord Fu Nanhua was going to marry a woman from Cloud Forest Jiang clan. The Jiang clan was one of the longest-standing affluent clans on Eastern Treasured Vile Continent, and it was said that in ancient times, back when Confucianism had only just become the official teaching of the majestic world, several grand priests had emerged from the Jiang clan after the etiquette sage established the earliest set of Confucian rules. Grand priests were one of the 6 heavenly official positions, and they were responsible for carrying out all types of rituals and ceremonies to attract the blessings of the heavens. The Jiang clan was situated on the southeastern coast of Eastern Treasured Vile Continent, and there was an extremely wide path leading out of its front gates, which faced the sea. The path was close to 20 kilometers in length, and it extended all the way into the sea. At its conclusion stood a pair of enormous natural corals that served as ceremonial gate towers, presenting a stunning and majestic sight to behold. After moving from Middle-earth Divine Continent to Eastern Treasured Vile Continent, the Jiang clan gradually turned its back on its scholarly roots to pursue business, and it had managed to remain standing to this day through all of the countless hardships and turmoil thrown its way. At this point, it possessed sufficient wealth to rival a nation, and the same applied to the Fu clan of Old Dragon City, so a coming together of these 2 clans in matrimony was massive news on the continent. Everyone was curious about what type of betrothal gift the Fu clan had presented, as well as what the Jiang clan was going to offer up as dowry. Was it going to be a pseudo-celestial tool? There were also many immortal powers who had shared close ties with the Fu clan for generations. What were they going to offer up as congratulatory gifts? With these questions hanging in the air, countless cultivators had swarmed into Old Dragon City the past couple of months to witness this grand occasion with their own eyes. On top of that, there were rumors swirling around that the bride was extremely hideous, and that added an additional element of intrigue. Fu Nanhua of Old Dragon City had always been renowned for his wide social circle. Yet after returning from Jewel's small world, he had suddenly become much more withdrawn. He wasn't going as far as to refuse to meet with guests, but only his existing friends were granted an audience with him, and he didn't make any effort to make new friends, in stark contrast with his past self. Ever since his return, he had remained in the Fu clan's residence almost this entire time, not showing his face at any of the favorite spots in the city that he had regularly frequented in the past. However, on this day, Fu Nanhua had left the Fu clan's residence and made his way to the entrance of Fu City on his own. There was a tall crown on his head, and he was dressed in a pristine white robe with a vibrant green dragon-shaped jade pendant hanging from his waist. He looked very calm and mature, but also a little jaded and dejected, in stark contrast with his vigorous and exuberant persona from back before he visited Jewel's small world. Recently, the Fu City had been receiving a constant influx of visitors, and even the senior servants of the Fu clan, who were perhaps even more experienced in treating guests than the imperial courts of some nations, were struggling to keep up. At this moment, there were quite a few important figures from some immortal powers gathered outside the gates of Fu City, here to offer their congratulations on what was widely viewed as one of the most significant marriage alliances in a very long time. Among them were representatives of Dawn Cloud Mountain. Dawn Cloud Mountain couldn't be referred to as a top-tier sect, but the cloud root stones that it produced were highly sought after across several continents, so it was constantly raking in huge revenue and was never lacking in resources. If a few prodigies that could carry the sect's future could emerge within its ranks, then its ascension to become one of Eastern Treasured Vile Continent's first-rate sects would be imminent. Old Dragon City had a centuries-long relationship with Dawn Cloud Mountain, as the cloud root stones produced by the latter were one of the important products carried by the Fu clan's treasure-swallowing whale and floating mountain ship. Whetstones crafted out of cloud root stones were extremely popular among swordsmen of the Sword Qi Great Wall, due to their exceptional quality and relatively low price. Of course, the low price was the most important factor of consideration. Even if a whetstone could sharpen a sword far better than a piece of a dragon-slaying platform, it would hardly matter if no one could afford it. At the moment, a fierce war was being waged against the demon tribe with no end in sight, and many swordsmen were already in severe debt to maintain their swords, so all of them had to be very frugal with their purchases. Of course, cloud root stones could only be referred to as cost-effective when compared with all of the other precious items being sent to the Sword Qi Great Wall. Cloud root stones were sold at extremely different price points depending on whether they were sold to cultivators of Eastern Treasured Vile Continent, the Fu clan of Old Dragon City, or swordsmen of the Sword Chi Great Wall. This time, Dawn Cloud Mountain had sent 4 representatives, namely 2 patriarchs and their most prized disciples. Fu Nanhua had finally come out of the Fu clan's residence in order to meet someone who should have already been dead, namely Kai Jinjian of Dawn Cloud Mountain. As Fu Nanhua made his surprise appearance, the people gathered near the city gate immediately erupted into conversation, while some began offering him greetings and congratulations. Fu Nanhua responded to everyone with impeccable etiquette, and finally, he arrived in front of a pair of carriages near the back of the line. The carriages were drawn by azure piebald horses, which were very distant relatives of fled dragons. These azure piebald horses indicated that these were carriages that had been hired from the Sun Clan's relay station. Everyone in Old Dragon City knew that there were 2 ways to spend massively in Old Dragon City: to purchase an Old Dragon cloud flipping pendant from the Fu clan, and to hire a carriage from Sun Jiaxu. Generally speaking, there were also 2 types of people who would pursue those 2 options: the extremely rich and the extremely foolish. Of course, the 2 patriarchs of Dawn Cloud Mountain didn't fall into that latter category. It was very much necessary for them to keep up appearances, particularly during their time in Old Dragon City. The 2 patriarchs hurriedly emerged from their carriages with their disciples at the sight of Fu Nanhua. One of those disciples was none other than Kai Jinjian, who was looking a little pale, but was still as beautiful as ever, while the other disciple was a handsome young man wearing a Dao robe with faint wisps of cloud and mist swirling around it. After making some small talk with the patriarchs of Dawn Cloud Mountain, Fu Nanhua stated a request, which was to take Kai Jinjian into the city for a private conversation. Kai Jinjian's master was ecstatic, and they certainly weren't going to turn down this request. Kai Jinjian had returned from Jewel Small World completely empty-handed, wasting an entire pouch of gold essence copper coins. In the face of those gold essence copper coins, grain rain coins may as well be ordinary copper coins, yet an entire pouch full of the former had disappeared without anything to show for them. As a result, during the past 2 years, Kai Jinjian's master had been made the laughingstock of the entire Dawn Cloud Mountain. The old man had intended to elevate Kai Jinjian to the position of mountain master someday, but that seemed like nothing more than a pipe dream now. What was even more infuriating to him was that following her return from Jewel Small World, Kai Jinjian had resembled a lifeless husk of her former self, displaying no enthusiasm or diligence in her cultivation. Her master was both infuriated by this, but also extremely concerned, fearing that Kai Jinjian would completely fall from grace and become the second Su Jia. Fu Nanhua and Kai Jinjian walked alongside each other through the gates of Fu City toward the former's resplendent private residence in the city. Back when he was searching for opportunities in Jewel Small World, Fu Nanhua had only been one of the many candidates to become heir to the city lord. Hence, Fu Nanhua had been very polite and respectful to Kai Jinjian. However, at this point, his master was on the verge of making a breakthrough, and with his marriage alliance to the Jiang clan, his status had been significantly elevated, and he was no longer the same Fu Nanhua of the past. Hence, in the eyes of the 2 Dawn Cloud Mountain patriarchs, Fu Nanhua definitely wasn't approaching Kai Jinjian for a private conversation just because they had met briefly in Jewel Small World. Could it be that a relationship had blossomed between the 2 of them during their time there? But that didn't make sense either, as Kai Jinjian was still a virgin. In any case, Fu Nanhua was all but certain to inherit the old dragon robe someday, and the fact that he was so receptive to Dawn Cloud Mountain was a great honor for the 2 patriarchs. Both Fu Nanhua and Kai Jinjian remained silent as they made their way through Fu City. Upon entering his private residence, Fu Nanhua sat down in the hall, then patted the brand new jade pendant that had been bestowed upon him by his father as he turned to Kai Jinjian. "All right, we can speak candidly with each other now." There was a smile on Kai Jinjian's face, but it was completely devoid of exuberance as she asked, "What do you want to talk about?" Fu Nanhua stared intently at Kai Jinjian as he said, "I won't ask you how you managed to survive. All I want to know is why that person saved you, and what he wants you to do for him." Kai Jinjian's smile faded as she asked, "Would you believe me if I told you that he did out of the kindness of his heart as a noble person?" A cold sneer appeared on Fu Nanhua's heart as he scoffed. A noble person? If Qi Jingchun were a noble person, then Confucian sages would have already claimed 4 worlds by now. Kai Jinjian's expression remained unchanged as she asked, "Is there any point in nitpicking my words?" Fu Nanhua took a deep breath then said, "I'm going to be open and honest with you. After that boy struck you down, he almost killed me too. At the time, Qi Jingchun saved me from that little rat bastard." Fu Nanhua suddenly noticed the mocking sneer on Cai Jingjian's face, and his words immediately cut off, following which he adopted a calmer tone as he continued. "After Qi Jingchun stopped Chen Ping'an, he told me some things, instructing me to leave Jewel's small world, but at the same time, he bestowed upon me an opportunity outside of any treasures. I won't tell you exactly what it is, but what I'm really perplexed about is that Qi Jingchun never made me swear a vow to never target Chen Ping'an or anything like that. In fact, he didn't even try to mediate our conflict at all." Cai Jingjian looked around with a detached expression, then turned back to face Fu Nanhua with a smile as she asked, "You're talking about a sage who saved your life. Should you not at least be referring to him as Mr. Qi?" A dismissive sneer appeared on Fu Nanhua's face as he scoffed. "He's already dead, and he was killed by a whole collection of celestial immortals, while none of the major Confucian figures stepped in to save him, so it's clear that there's no chance of him ever making a comeback, so what does it matter if he's a sage?" Cai Jingjian merely smiled in response, then sighed. "None of the places where the patriarchs of our Dawn Cloud Mountain reside and cultivate are anywhere near as abundant in spiritual energy as this manor of yours. Your Fu clan truly is astonishingly rich, Fu Nanhua." This private residence had 8 main pillars, known as coiling dragon pillars, and each of them had a coiling dragon engraved around it. Each dragon held a treasured bead in its mouth, and each bead was a connate spirit tool, gathering a vast amount of spiritual energy in the manner to make it resemble a miniature blessed land, thereby significantly enhancing the progress of one's cultivation. For those cultivating in the top-tier immortal clans of the world, they were constantly cultivating no matter what they did thanks to these resources at their disposal, so it made sense for itinerant cultivators to be so envious of them. A cold look appeared on Fu Nanhua's face, and his eyes narrowed slightly as he said, "Don't try to play dumb with me, Cai Jingjian. I'm going to be granted a treasure-swallowing whale soon, and if I refuse to purchase cloud root stones from your sect, Dawn Cloud Mountain's revenue will instantly decrease by 20%. You may be held in very high regard by your master, but you've already wasted an entire pouch of gold essence copper coins, so I suggest you have a long, hard think before you harm the interests of Dawn Cloud Mountain even further through your actions." A smile appeared on Cai Jingjian's face as she said, "Don't bother with these empty threats, Fu Nanhua. I don't know exactly how much wealth your Fu clan possesses, but I know exactly how your clan has been doing business over the past few thousand years. So what if you're coming into possession of a treasure-swallowing whale? Even if you become the city lord, there's no way you'll be able to change the rules established by your ancestors." The cold look in Fu Nanhua's eyes faded as he sighed. "You're clearly a very smart woman, and the two of us went through that grueling ordeal in Jewel's small world together, so why can't we work together for our mutual benefit? Let's be open and candid with each other so we can both erase the after effects of that ordeal. If you choose to work with me, I promise you that not only will I strive for the position of City Lord, I'll also help you advance up the hierarchy as well. Think about it. All I need to do is slightly raise my purchase price of cloud root stones, then spread word of the fact that you made an integral contribution to that decision, and your status in Dawn Cloud Mountain would instantly be elevated to new heights. On top of that, you possess exceptional aptitude, and your master clearly has very high hopes for you. With him acting as your backer in the sect and Old Dragon City serving as an external backer, you'll become the mountain master of Dawn Cloud Mountain in a century at the very latest." Fu Nanhua rose to his feet as he spoke, and the tone of his voice was becoming more and more passionate by the second, as if he were an emperor laying out the future plight of his empire. Cai Jingjian turned to Fu Nanhua, and it was clear from her expression that she remained largely unmoved. It wasn't that Fu Nanhua wasn't being sufficiently genuine, or the picturing that he was painting wasn't sufficiently alluring. The problem was that Cai Jingjian's mental state had completely changed, and she was no longer the same ambitious and scheming woman that she once was. Even though all of the questions that had stumped her in her cultivation had been answered, Cai Jingjian was in no hurry to progress in her cultivation base following her return to Dawn Cloud Mountain. Instead, she read all of the books recommended to her by Qi Jingchun, then replayed his words over and over again in her mind. From the perspective of outsiders, she had abandoned her cultivation, but she knew in her heart that was not the case. At some point, she was told by her master in private that Qi Jingchun had met his demise, killed by several celestial immortals above the northern region of Eastern Treasured Vile Continent. In response to this news, Cai Jingjian hadn't been particularly grief-stricken. Instead, she had merely felt a little dejected. After that, she finally resumed her cultivation, and it didn't take long before she progressed up a tier, and she had to conceal her cultivation base so that she didn't astonish those around her. Only then was she granted this opportunity to visit Old Dragon City with her master. This string of events had all begun with that encounter on Clay Vase Alley. Ultimately, it was her past foolish and unreasonable self that had ruined the life of that young boy. Clearly, Qi Jingchun treated that boy not like a sage looking down on the people of the world with detachment and doing everything by the rules. Instead, he was like a protective senior nurturing a junior, and for this purpose he was willing to even ignore and go against the rules. If she had died in that alley, then the so-called heavenly Tao backlash and karmic retribution of Buddhism would have fallen upon that boy. After that, Qi Jingchun's intentions had been very pure during their question and answer session. He most likely felt like she was still not beyond saving, so he was still willing to teach her. In the wake of this experience, Kai Jinjian had figured out many things that had stumped her in the past. Her mental state had become clear and tranquil, and all of the impurities had been swept away. Furthermore, visualization was of the utmost importance for cultivators of Dawn Cloud Mountain, and that was what had allowed her to make such rapid progress in her cultivation. Even though she wasn't tempted by Fu Nanhua's proposal, Kai Jinjian didn't immediately leave. Instead, a knowing smile appeared on her face as she said, "How about this, Fu Nanhua? Our first alliance ended terribly, so for our second alliance today, how about we make another bet? I'll bet that you can don the old dragon robe, while you can bet that I'll become the mountain master of Dawn Cloud Mountain someday. What do you think? I can promise you here and now that if I become the mountain master of Dawn Cloud Mountain, then I'll sell all of our 6 cloud root stones to your Fu clan without sparing any for the 5 major clans of Old Dragon City. Prior to that, I'll also encourage my master to increase the amount of cloud root stones allocated to your treasure-swallowing whale, as much as possible." Fu Nanhua was caught completely off guard by this proposal, and he couldn't help but wonder if this was some type of trap, so his confidence was wavering slightly. Even though the ordeal in Jewel's small world hadn't become an inner demon on his cultivation path, he was still very much troubled by those events, and if he couldn't sort through his own thoughts and make a decision on what to do with Chen Ping'an as soon as possible, then it would continue to weigh on his mind. Meanwhile, Kai Jinjian had already risen to her feet, and she made her way over to one of the coiling dragon pillars to inspect the white jewel in the dragon's mouth with an intrigued look on her face. In the end, Fu Nanhua didn't give her a definitive answer, instead asking her to wait for a few days. Following Kai Jinjian's departure, Fu Nanhua removed the green jade pendant from his waist and held it in his hand as he began to pace around the hall in circles, weighing up his options. A tall man with an authoritative disposition wearing a dragon robe suddenly appeared in the hall without any warning. He was standing beside the same coiling dragon pillar, inspecting the same jewel that Kai Jinjian had been looking at earlier, as if he were trying to stand in her shoes to see what her intentions were. Fu Nanhua failed to detect his silent arrival, and only after Fu Nanhua had noticed him did the man turn his gaze to him as he asked, "Why didn't you agree to her offer?" "Something doesn't feel right about all of this," Fu Nanhua replied. The dragon-robed man was none other than City Lord Fu Qi, and he said, "It's very simple. There are 2 paths laid out before you, the first of which is to kill Chen Ping'an and forcibly suppress the unrest in your heart, using their cultivation to sever by force the impact that Confucian sage had on you. Or, you can go with the flow. For the average cultivator, the greater the heights they ascend to, the more certain knots in their heart will manifest themselves as flaws in their cultivation, but in our Fu clan, these knots can be used to form pearls in one's mind's lake through the use of secret techniques." A mocking sneer appeared on his face as he continued. "To think that you're feeling so conflicted over such a minor problem. At this rate, you'll never be worthy to inherit this old dragon robe." Fu Nanhua immediately began sweating profusely upon hearing this. The man shook his head as he sighed. "To think that my son would be so bothered by a dead man and an insignificant young boy." Fu Nanhua's face turned deathly pale. The man sneered as he continued, "Even after I inherited this old dragon robe, there have been times where I've had to kneel on the ground and beg others for the sake of our Fu clan, and I had to kowtow to them so many times that my forehead bled. Do you think those things don't weigh on my mind?" Fu Nanhua's mind was completely blank, and he was completely oblivious to the fact that tears had begun flowing down his face. The man gave one final mocking sneer before vanishing into thin air. If one could bypass that profound restriction of Stalactite Mountain and stand at the point where the 2 worlds were connected, then they would be greeted by a stunning sight, namely a wall that stretched all the way up into the clouds, looking as if it were as old as time. To the south of the wall was the true owner of this world, while to its north was a city without walls. The earliest group of sword immortals to arrive here had once stated that if the demon tribe were allowed to pass over the Sword Chi Great Wall, then all of the city walls under the heavens may as well cease to exist. After that, not even a single brick was added to the outskirts of the city. Over 100,000 swordsmen resided here generation after generation, completely isolated from the rest of the world. Aside from the select few people who were able to travel to Stalactite Mountain, the rest of them all abided by their ancestral teachings, never setting foot in Majestic World. They lived here, they died here, and to them, dying in battle outside the Sword Chi Great Wall was the utmost honor, while dying of old age within the Sword Chi Great Wall was the humiliating disgrace. Some things here were different from Majestic World outside, but there were also inevitably some similar things. For example, there were also some long-standing major clans residing within the Sword Chi Great Wall. But unlike the major clans in the outside world, who constantly had to urge their descendants to look after themselves and be safe, that was completely unnecessary here, and no matter how powerful a clan was, all of its men had to carry out sword delivery duties at 12 years of age, even if they were the only child of their generation. At the latest, one had to go to the south of the city wall to join in the battle there, and 30 years of age was the oldest one could be before they had to leave the city wall to go and slay demons in the south. Almost all of the women wanted to marry men who possessed superior swordsmanship to themselves, and if their husband were to die in battle, then she would immediately follow them, after which their children would come next. None of the poems told about the wars on the borders could compare with the stories that came out of this place. If any outsiders were to speak of any horrific battles that they had seen, they would be scoffed at by the people in the Sword Chi Great Wall for even daring to make the comparison. In the wake of the Second War's conclusion, peace and quiet returned to this city, which was situated to the north of the Sword Chi Great Wall. The city was filled with all types of buildings and landmarks, such as bridges over flowing water, vast and flamboyant manors, streets that were lined with sword shops, and also crude thatch huts where multiple generations of people shared the same room. At a street-side wine shop sat 6 people around a table, one of whom was a gallant-looking young girl with brows that resembled thin blades. She was sitting on the same bench with another young girl who was missing an arm. The latter was very short and thin, but she was carrying an astonishingly huge sword on her back with a wooden expression on her face. The oldest one among the 6 was a handsome young man in his 20s. The sword chi emanating from his body was so formidable that it formed a virtually substantial barrier around him, and although sheathed, his sword was also giving off an incredibly powerful aura. There was a portly young boy seated on another bench while taking small sips of wine with a smile on his face. His backside was very large, while the surface of the bench was quite narrow, so it was a rather uncomfortable seating arrangement, and he was constantly having to twist from side to side to get comfortable. Placed on his lap was a sword that was also in his scabbard, but there were arcs of purple lightning flashing all over. Whenever an arc of lightning struck him on the belly, he would immediately wince and shudder. Seated next to him was a hideous young boy with skin black as coal and scars all over his face. However, his sword had a very effeminate name, which was elaborate Maku. Across from him sat another handsome young boy with 2 swords in his possession, one strapped to each side of his waist. One of the swords had no scabbard, and the words "cloud pattern" were inscribed onto its blade in antiquated characters. The 6 of them had fought alongside one another during the first battle, but on that occasion, they had lost a friend by the name of Grasshopper. This time they had better luck. All of them were injured, but no one had perished during the recently concluded battle. However, the 2 leaders of their team, a pair of 10th-tier swordsmen, were unable to return to the Sword Chi Great Wall alive. The portly young boy enjoyed drinking wine, but he took even more joy in encouraging others to drink with him. The handsome young boy with the Dong surname really liked to make fun of the hideous scar-faced young boy, while the young girl missing an arm liked to shoot furtive glances at the handsome young man. Meanwhile, the gallant-looking young girl was drinking by herself while staring into the distance in a daze, but even in her absent-minded state, there was nothing frail or weak about her, and she appeared ready to spring back into battle at any moment. Some time later, a pair of young women roughly 18 to 19 years of age arrived, and one of them immediately sat down beside the hideous young boy so that the 3 of them were sharing one bench. As a result, the portly young boy was forced to the edge of the bench, so his rotund bottom was spilling over the bench on 3 sides, much to his dismay. As soon as the 2 women arrived, the young boy with the Dong surname immediately stopped making fun of the hideous young boy, and was looking rather fearful of the pleasant and harmless-looking round-faced woman sitting across from him. The other young woman had a sharp yet elegant chin, and she immediately sat down beside the handsome young boy without any hesitation, while the latter rolled his eyes in disdain, thinking to himself that the woman wasn't even as good-looking as he was, yet harbored delusions of becoming his wife. The round-faced young woman asked the 6 of them why they were gathered here, and she was informed that the young man's training stint here was about to come to an end, and he was soon going to return to the Confucian school on Middle-earth Divine Continent, at which point he would be promoted from virtuous scholar to noble scholar. He removed his righteous aura sword from his waist, then set it down onto the table, stating that Aoyang had given it to swordsmen of the Sword Chi Great Wall, not to him, so he had to leave it behind. The portly young boy was very happy to hear this. He had been longing for that sword for quite some time, and he immediately nodded in agreement while praising the young man for his righteousness and his quality of character, and he also declared that if the young man were to ever come back, then he would welcome him by applauding with both hands and both feet. For the first time, the young girl with the missing arm spoke up, saying that the young man had fought in 2 grueling battles and slain so many demons of the middle 5 tiers, so he deserved to take righteous aura with him. The young man paid no heed to this as he looked around, trying to see if there were any familiar faces on the streets nearby that could pay his bill for him. Meanwhile, the hideous young boy was focused entirely on drinking. The round-faced young woman sitting beside him was his elder sister, and she tried to persuade him to drink less, but he completely ignored her, so she could only sit beside him with a resigned expression. "Take the sword," the gallant-looking young girl said in a concise manner, and no one raised any objections to this. All of the people at the table were quite lofty in status, including an eminent Confucian noble scholar, and members of the Dong and Chan clans. If there were someone from the Qi clan present as well, then all 3 surnames of the Sword Chi Great Wall would be represented here. All of a sudden, the handsome young boy's brows furrowed slightly, and he grumbled under his breath. "Oh great! Here come those idiots." There was a group of young men walking along the street. All of them appeared to be around 20 years of age, and they were giving off formidable sword chi and killing intent. Coincidentally, their leader had the Qi surname, and he had a pair of swords strapped to his back. He was a very tall and imposing man, and he made his way over to the wine shop, staring directly at the gallant-looking young girl while trying to make appear as amicable as possible as he asked with a friendly smile, "Ningyao, are you selling your family's dragon-slaying platform or not? We can negotiate the price, my family definitely won't screw you over. Besides, everyone knows how close our parents are. If it wasn't for my grandfather's intervention, our marriage would have been decided at birth." "Piss off!" the gallant-looking young girl snapped without even raising her head. The man with the Qi surname wasn't incensed in the slightest as he immediately obliged, scurrying away with his tail between his legs. Someone from his group was very angry to see this, and he mused in a condescending voice, "Some people are simply born luckier than others. I suppose when both your parents are powerful sword immortals, you can do whatever you please, even almost losing the entire Sword Chi Great Wall to the enemy." The gallant-looking young girl remained completely unmoved, but all of the other people at the table instantly sprang to their feet, and even the Confucian scholar who had come here for training had grabbed onto righteous aura. The portly young boy bared his teeth in a menacing fashion as he said, "What was that? Your father here couldn't really hear you just now. How about you repeat that for me?" The handsome young boy had already erupted into a furious tirade. "You little shit. I'll kill your entire family." He then took a glance at the hideous young boy across from him as he asked, "So what'll it be? You want to go first or should I go?" The hideous young boy offered no response, merely shrugging off his sister as he picked up his sword and began making his way toward the group of young men. The man with the Qi surname raised a hand, gesturing for everyone behind him to remain silent, then stepped forward with a smile as he asked, "Are you sure you want to pick a fight with us, Charcoal Dong?" The boy continued onward in an expressionless manner, and he had already gripped onto the hilts of his scripture and cloud-patterned swords, both of which had been bestowed upon him by Aoyang. Ningyao had saved his life on 3 occasions, and now that her parents were gone and Aoyang had also left, he had to step forward to defend her honor. Otherwise, he may as well put an end to his own life right here. His sister smiled as she said, "Just don't kill anyone. As long as you don't cross that line, I can smooth things over with our grandfather." As soon as this declaration was made, even the young man with the Qi surname was left feeling a little fearful. All of a sudden, the sound of knuckles tapping down onto a table rang out, and Dong Huafu turned around. Come back, charcoal, Ning Yao instructed in an indifferent manner. The boy turned around a disgruntled expression before sitting back down at his original spot, and his sister patted him on the head in consolation. The boy was still feeling very frustrated, and he immediately turned to his sister with a furious expression, in response to which she made a funny face at him to try and cheer him up, while the handsome young boy looked on with an enraptured expression. Only then was the situation defused. The young man with the Qi surname departed with his companions, and only after they were very far away did he turn to the young man who had just provoked Ning Yao as he said, "Don't go anywhere the next few days. Alternatively, come stay at my place for a while." The man immediately nodded in response with an uneasy look on his face. After everyone had sat back down again, Ning Yao sighed. None of you are children anymore, so stop behaving like children. Besides, this is a private matter of mine, so why are outsiders like yourselves getting involved? I'll remember what he said, and he'll have what's coming to him eventually. Everyone fell silent upon hearing this. A thought then suddenly occurred to Ning Yao, and a cold sneer appeared on her face as she said, I heard that guy smashed the Taoist second disciple back to the majestic world with a single punch. Everyone immediately smiled upon hearing this, but of course, the smile that had appeared on the young man's face was a rather bitter one. An absent-minded look appeared on the portly young boy's face, and he took a large swig of wine, as if something depressing or joyful had just sprung into his mind. After his first time fighting atop the city wall, he had turned to Aoyang with a hopeful expression as he asked, Aoyang, what do you think of my swordsmanship? Surely I'm half as good as you now. Aoyang merely continued to drink wine while placating the boy with some half-hearted answers. Aoyang, give me a straight answer. I don't care if you compliment or insult me, I can take it. All right, in that case, I'd say that your swordsmanship is very flashy but not very effective. What does that mean? I'm saying that your swordsmanship looks like it could kill a tiger, but in reality you can only kill a mouse. The boy was immediately brought to the verge of tears upon hearing this, and he felt as if the entire world were crashing down around him, as if he would never be able to make anything out of himself. Aoyang then tossed his wine gourd at him with a smile as he said, Back when I was your age, I wasn't even at your level. The chubby little boy instantly puffed out his chest with pride. That was the first time that he had tasted wine, and it was absolutely rancid. The handsome young man was resting his chin on one hand while biting onto the edge of his cup between his teeth, and he could drink the wine in the cup without even using his hands by tipping his head back. He had learned this move from Aoyang, and he had found it to be extremely badass. Aoyang, I heard you've been to the Bamboo Sea Small World. Is Lady Zhu really that beautiful? She is. She's got a pair of really long legs. I'm asking about her face. What's the use in having long legs? The young boy was immediately pushed aside Aoyang as the latter said, You're clearly not a man of culture. Even though Dong Huafu's sister hadn't drunk any wine this entire time, there was still a dreamy smile on her face. She had once mustered up her courage to approach Aoyang before asking if he missed his home. Do you want to take a wife back with you the next time you return home? How about you take me as your wife, Aoyang? A stunned look had appeared on his face upon hearing this. My goodness! I've traveled far and wide without encountering a worthy opponent. Never did I think such a sprightly young girl would prove to be my downfall. At the time, Dong Huafu had still been a snotty little kid, but he could understand what they were saying, and he turned his head to the side and spat onto the ground in disgust. Aoyang handed his wine gourd to the girl, then patted her on the head as he said, Trust me, you don't want to be my wife. All I do is wander around aimlessly, and anyone who becomes my wife will have nothing but suffering ahead of them. The girl accepted the wine gourd, but didn't dare to drink from it. Aoyang burst into laughter as he encouraged, It's all right, you can have a few sips. I know your patriarch doesn't want you to drink, but he won't scold you if you drink my wine. All he'll do is blame me. As the girl was drinking out of the gourd, Aoyang stepped onto the sword chi great wall, then cast his gaze into the distance, smoothing his own hair down as he sighed. Wine can make your cheeks red while worries can turn your hair white. If you're going to find a man for yourself, make sure you find someone as handsome and talented as myself. Of course, I'm not saying you should pursue me. I'm saying that you should find someone like me. All of a sudden, Dong Huafu yelled, Aoyang, I need to take a shit. Hurry up and take me to the south. It's about to come out. Aoyang hurriedly jumped down from the wall, cursing under his breath as he cradled Dong Huafu in his arms before flying away into the south. As for whether there were any perils in the south or whether there were any great demons lurking nearby, That was naturally of no concern to him. Dong Huafu's sister knew that her brother was as safe could be with Aoyang. So she wasn't worried either. There was no place under the heavens that Aoyang couldn't go. No matter how much her grandfather disliked Aoyang, he could never bring himself to denounce Aoyang as swordsmanship. In the end, Dong Huafu was unable to hold it in, and he pooped all over his pants. Aoyang was washing his pants by a creek while watching him run around with his backside bare, and he chuckled to himself, "Looks like I'm receiving retribution for rejecting your mother so many times. I'm not even your father, yet I'm being forced to perform these degrading fatherly duties." In the end he left. He left his sword and a badass character behind, then departed from the Sword Chi Great Wall with just his conical bamboo hat. On that day, countless women drank in solidarity in the city behind the Sword Chi Great Wall, while their husbands were also drinking by themselves with sullen expressions. After that, Aoyang found the young boy who had been chosen by Qi Jingchun, and to the young boy he declared, "My name is Aoyang, Liang as in kindness." After the two of them became a bit more familiar with each other, he told the boy that he had countless female admirers under the heavens, and the boy merely brushed that off as a boastful lie. After drinking for a while longer, everyone parted ways, and Ningyao returned home on her own. On the way back there were many people pointing at and discussing her. Some were sympathetic, some were spiteful, some heaved forlorn sighs, and some were full of admiration. Ningyao lived in one of the largest manors in the entire city, and there were still many of her fellow clansmen around, but there were also some people missing. She made her way onto the sword spar arena, then laid down onto the massive slab of dragon-slaying platform to take a nap. A letter had told her that an idiot was coming to deliver a sword to her, so why was he still not here yet? She couldn't help but feel a little angry at this thought. Sure enough, Chun Ping'an received a comprehensive package of information about the dust medicinal shop before nightfall. Aside from its address, he was also informed that the shopkeeper was a man with the Zhang surname, and that the shop was one of the ancestral properties of the Fu clan, one of the 5 major clans of Old Dragon City. Shopkeeper Jing had a northern greatly accent, and on the surface, he appeared to be a crude and perverted man doing nothing but wasting his life away, but in reality, he had gone to the Fu manor on 2 occasions, and the Fu clan clearly held him in extremely high regard. There was a very good chance that he was the martial arts instructor of Fan Gaoming, the grandson of the Fu clan's leader. As for his portrait, that would only be ready the next day. Upon receiving this information, it immediately became apparent to Chun Ping'an that this shopkeeper Zheng was none other than gatekeeper Zheng Dafeng of the small town. As for the fact the Fan clan held him in such high regard, this didn't come as a surprise to Chun Ping'an at all. No matter how incapable and improper he appeared, the fact that he had been assigned to a post where he regularly handled gold essence copper coins was a clear indication that there was more to him than met the eye. Otherwise, Old Man Yang wouldn't have instructed Chun Ping'an to go to him to have his true Qi 8-tail talismans removed. Aside from that, Sun Jiashu had also sent someone to bring Chun Ping'an detailed packages of information pertaining to the mountain and sea turtle and Osmanthus Island so that he could make an informed decision on which one to take. The intercontinental journey was one that spanned millions of kilometers over a vast array of diverse, and at times perilous terrains, so it was not a journey to be taken lightly. The packages of information were accompanied by a handwritten letter from Sun Jiashu, which essentially said, "I know you've decided to take our Sun Clan's mountain and sea turtle, but I'm going to lay out the pros and cons of both the mountain and sea turtle and Osmanthus Island for you nevertheless." This seemed to be completely superfluous, but after reading the letter and briefly pondering the matter, Chun Ping'an immediately developed a sense of newfound admiration for the way that Sun Jiashu conducted his business. If he were a merchant looking to purchase products from Old Dragon City, he would definitely choose to collaborate with the more meticulous Sun Clan over others. However, there was one thing that Chun Ping'an was mistaken about, which was that the Sun Clan was very stubborn and dogmatic in the way that it conducted its business. In particular, it placed extremely heavy emphasis on maintaining an immaculate reputation, and it only ever chose business partners for itself, so not just anyone could do business with the Sun Clan, regardless of how wealthy and powerful they were. The Sun Clan had just as many strange rules as the Fu Clan did strange people. Reach the 4th tier, find the medicinal shop, choose a suitable ship. These were the 3 main things on Chun Ping'an's to-do list, and with all of them ticked off, he was able to enjoy dinner in peace. The seafood soup from lunch had been replaced with one that was cooked using freshwater delicacies, and it suited Chun Ping'an's tastes far better. He ate like the wind, and for the first time in quite some time he ate until he was extremely full. After dinner he went out for a stroll on the riverbank. The sun was setting in the west, presenting a beautiful sight to behold. Chen Ping'an felt as if he were in a blessed land, and decided there and then that he had to come back someday, should the opportunity arise. All of a sudden, Chen Ping'an was struck by the urge to fish, and he ran back to the Sun Clan's ancestral residence to ask an elderly steward if they had any fishing rods. He also asked about the recent fishing conditions, whether there were any particularly large fish in the river, and whether burley had to be used. The old steward was very familiar with all matters related to fishing, and he patiently answered all of Chen Ping'an's questions. After that, he helped Chen Ping'an make the necessary preparations, and the two of them traveled to a good fishing spot together. Upon learning that Chen Ping'an intended to fish until very late into the night, the steward offered to set up a waterside tent for him, but Chen Ping'an had never been one to indulge in such luxuries, so he refused. The old man didn't force the issue, and he departed to leave Chen Ping'an on his own. Chen Ping'an was in no hurry to begin fishing. Instead, he began to practice walking meditation back and forth by the river. After around 2 hours of walking meditation, he practiced standing meditation for 2 more hours, and only then did he begin fishing. He closed his eyes as he cast his line, and the sound of the bait plopping into the water rang out. A light breeze blew over the rapeseed blossoms, causing their stalks to tremble and sway. The water in the river slowly flowed into the distance, and small waves were visible on its surface, while invisible currents surged beneath the surface. The fishing line was as thin as a strand of hair, and it was gently being tugged upon, occasionally being stretched taut before loosening again. That entire night, Chen Ping'an remained completely still, allowing the smaller fish to nibble at his bait. No big fish took the bait, and before long, Chen Ping'an had already sat until daybreak. Right at this moment, he cast his gaze toward the east, and the instant that he opened his eyes, he was greeted by a spectacular scene that he had never witnessed before. To the naked eye, the light of the rising sun should have only been red in coloration, but Chen Ping'an was able to see a burst of golden qi rising up in the east with the sun. These bursts of golden qi resembled golden dragons slowly roaming across the horizon. Chen Ping'an continued to stare at the rising sun and the golden qi in the distance, and he wasn't experiencing any discomfort despite how bright and glaring the light was. Perhaps it was just a figment of his imagination. But Chen Ping'an felt his heart and soul shudder slightly at the sight of the descending golden qi, and all of a sudden, a dozen golden dragons descended out of the sky before pouncing directly at him. They were giving off a menacing aura, as if they were determined to crush anyone who dared to gaze upon them. The dragons were approaching extremely quickly, and Chen Ping'an let go of his fishing rod as he hurriedly rose to his feet. His fist intent surged forth on its own, spreading throughout his body and his acupoints. In the face of this provocation, Chen Ping'an felt as if he were facing Cui Chan's grandfather in the bamboo building of Downtrodden Mountain. In this moment his fist intent stood above even the heavens and the earth, and he had to unleash this punch no matter what. The dozen or so golden flood dragons had no substantial form, and they were flying directly at Chen Ping'an, who immediately adopted his rain evaporation technique stance. First, he planted his feet onto the bank of the river one after the other, doing so with such tremendous force that the power of his stomps penetrated over 3 meters deep into the ground. Not only was the ground trembling and rumbling beneath his feet, even the water near the bank of the river was churning, and waves were rising up and surging toward the opposite bank. First and 15th had both emerged from the sword-nurturing gourd, but they were merely resting lazily on the opening of the gourd as passive bystanders, seemingly not regarding the golden flood dragons descending from the heavens as enemies. Chen Ping'an was completely immersed in his fist intent, so he was oblivious to the astonishing phenomenon that he was creating. The only thought in his mind was that now that he had reached the 4th tier, his punches should be even faster. However, during the past night of fishing, he had spent the entire time adjusting to the new world that he was witnessing, as well as stabilizing all of his acupoints in his churning aura, so he never had the opportunity to throw a punch to see just how fast it was. Now that the perfect opportunity had arisen, he was determined to capture the moment. Get back! Chen Ping'an roared as he threw a punch at the leading flood dragon in the sky. His fist intent filled his sleeves, causing them to billow and flap audibly, and a resounding boom rang out as the water in the river churned violently, while a large swathe of the rapeseed blossoms in the field on the other side of the river were blown over. The ethereal golden flood dragon had no physical body, but it was still struck on the head by Chen Ping'an's almighty fist intent, and was sent flying back over 30 meters in a dazed and disoriented state. Immediately thereafter, A string of resounding booms rang out as all of the golden flood dragons were forced back up into the sky by Qian Ping'an's rain evaporation technique. There they continued to circle around in the air, looking down at Qian Ping'an with befuddlement and indignation in their eyes. In the end they could only turn tail and fly back toward the distant horizon. Qian Ping'an faltered slightly upon seeing this, and in the blink of an eye, the golden qi had faded, restoring the rising sun in the east to its normal state. Qian Ping'an got out of his fist stance as a pleased smile appeared on his face. Those punches had been thrown with tremendous power and speed, reflecting a substantial improvement from the third tier to the fourth. He felt as if he were no longer restricted by heaven and earth, and there was no sense of sloppiness anymore. On the opening of the sword-nurturing gourd, 1st and 15th exchanged a glance with each other, following which the latter quickly flew back into the gourd, seemingly too embarrassed to show itself any longer. Meanwhile, the more short-tempered first was rooted to the spot for a moment, then sprang up into the air before piercing through Qian Ping'an's body over and over again. It was unable to harm Qian Ping'an, but it still seemed determined to run through his body, repeatedly in order to vent its fury. While inside a swordsman's acupoints, a bonded flying sword would always be insubstantial in form, and it would only attain a substantial form upon its emergence. This was a rule set in stone, so a flying sword nurtured in a swordsman's acupoint would never be able to harm them. At the moment, the relationship between Qian Ping'an and his two bonded flying swords wasn't the customary master and servant relationship commonly seen between swordsmen and their bonded flying swords. Instead, it was more like the relationship between tenant and landlord. Qian Ping'an was rather perplexed by First's furious reaction, and he scratched his head as he asked, "What's wrong? Are you embarrassed for me because my punches were too weak?" Following its departure, the phenomenon of golden flood dragons from earlier traveled directly to the Sun Clan's ancestral residence, and the 4 guest elders of the Sun Clan, consisting of 3 golden core tier cultivators and 1 nascent tier cultivator, were forced to dispel it. After that, they gathered together in a small library in the ancestral residence. This time they were no longer arguing about whether Qian Ping'an was a qi refiner or a martial artist, but they had found another topic of debate. There were only 2 situations in which such a phenomenon would arise, the first of which was during a qi refiner's ascension to the golden core tier. From there, they would no longer be restrained by heaven and earth, and the ensuing heaven and earth resonance would result in the formation of a golden core in their pill room, the caliber of which would be determined by the magnitude of the phenomenon triggered by the qi refiner. The other possible scenario in which such a phenomenon would arise would be during a martial artist's ascension to the 4th tier, or the 7th tier. The probability of the former arising was next to 0, while it was almost to be expected for martial artists who had reached the 7th tier. Such a phenomenon was even rarer than that of the clay bodhisattva crossing the river, and one could use it to refine their body and soul. Hence, it was an extremely rare and significant opportunity that had to be cherished. It was clear from Qian Ping'an's formidable sword intent that he was not a qi refiner, so he could only be a pure martial artist. However, there was still much debate over whether he was a 4th tier or 7th tier martial artist. This time, 3 of the guest elders were convinced that he was a 7th tier martial artist. Only then would it make sense for Sun Jiaxu to invite him to the Sun Clan's ancestral residence as an esteemed guest. Furthermore, there was no way that a 4th tier martial artist would be able to trigger such a spectacular phenomenon. Despite this, there was still one person who firmly believed that Qian Ping'an had only just reached the 4th tier. All of a sudden, a wry smile appeared on the logger's face as he said, "Let's set aside this argument for now. Should we not be lamenting over the fact that he just inexplicably passed up a brilliant opportunity?" The other 3 guest elders immediately fell silent upon hearing this. Indeed, the young boy had just triggered an extremely profound bout of heaven and earth resonance. This was something that the average pure martial artist could only dream of, yet he had chased it like a fool with his fists. In the wake of this incident, all 4 guest elders were left feeling utterly perplexed. It was clear that this young boy was an exceptionally prodigious martial artist, so why hadn't his master told him about such a phenomenon? It was common knowledge among martial artists that a breakthrough to the 4th tier or the 7th tier could trigger such a phenomenon, yet it appeared that the boy was completely oblivious to this. Of course, none of them would have been able to imagine in a million years that the old man in the bamboo building who had taught Qian Ping'an his fist techniques had once reached the pinnacle of the 10th tier, so he didn't consider something to be important at all. Instead, he regarded it completely insignificant, just as all things were outside of one's fundamental fist techniques. In his eyes, such a phenomenon was something to be avoided at all costs, as it was no different from a shortcut. Hence, if he had seen what Qian Pingyan had done, he would have surely chortled with glee and praised Qian Pingyan for his idiocy. At noon, Sun Jiashu returned to the ancestral residence, and prior to seeing Qian Pingyan, he was approached by one of the Sun clan's guest elders, who had jokingly remarked to him, "That guest of yours is truly a remarkable boy." Sun Jiashu curiously asked why that remark had been made, and the guest elder explained the situation to him, upon which he slapped a hand to his own forehead in exasperation. How remarkable! Indeed. While they were having lunch together, Qian Pingyan noticed that Sun Jiashu was looking at him with a rather strange look in his eyes, much like how he had looked at Lu Baqiao back when they first met. Qian Pingyan thought that this was because the phenomenon in the morning had caused trouble for the Sun clan's ancestral residence, and a concerned look appeared on his face as he asked, "What's wrong? Did my punches from this morning alert the Fu clan to my presence here?" Sun Jiashu shook his head with a smile as he replied, "There are countless qi refiners and martial artists in Old Dragon City, and strange occurrences take place here every day. On top of that, very few people dare to spy on our Sun clan's ancestral residence, so you can rest assured that you won't be discovered here." A hesitant look then appeared on Sun Jiashu's face, and he was internally debating whether he should reveal what had happened to Qian Pingyan. He wanted to tell him the truth, but he was also concerned that the truth would be too painful for him to bear. After much internal conflict, Sun Jiashu ultimately decided on a policy of honesty, revealing to Qian Pingyan the exceptional opportunity that he had inadvertently passed up. After hearing what Sun Jiashu had to say, Qian Pingyan took a sip of wine, then asked, "Will those golden flood dragons appear again if I go to look at the rising sun tomorrow? What do you think?" Sun Jiashu snapped in exasperation. Qian Pingyan heaved a faint sigh, then gulped down a large mouthful of wine as he mused, "Being uneducated is truly a terrible curse." Sun Jiashu sat back in his chair as he jibed, "Are you planning to go night fishing again, then wait for the sunrise? Can you read minds, Sun Jiashu?" Qian Pingyan exclaimed with a surprised expression. Sun Jiashu hurriedly waved his hands in response. "I have no such ability, but I've heard that the founder of commercialism really was able to read minds." After that, Qian Pingyan went to the river to fish once again, while Sun Jiashu walked along beside him, carrying a fish basket. On the way there, Qian Pingyan told him about why he had previously been searching for the dust medicinal shop, and that he no longer needed to go there now that he had made a breakthrough to the 4th tier, but he still wanted to visit the shop to meet an acquaintance. Sun Jiashu naturally agreed to this request, telling him that he could go the next day, but some preparations had to be made prior to that. If he were to personally accompany Qian Pingyan, that would only attract attention and place him in even more danger, so he was going to assign a Golden Core tier guest elder of the Sun clan to accompany Qian Pingyan instead. As the head of the Sun clan, there was no end to the matters that Sun Jiashu had to attend to, so he naturally couldn't just spend the day fishing with Qian Pingyan. The fish that the Sun clan were catching were far bigger than the ones in this river. Hence, Sun Jiashu quickly returned to the ancestral residence to take care of some daily duties. After sitting down at the table, he laid out some stacks of account books, and an antiquated abacus was placed in front of him. The abacus didn't appear remarkable in any way, but what set it apart from the average abacus was the group of tiny golden people seated around it. Just like bug silver, they were born from treasure vaults, and their bodies had a shimmering golden hue. Each of them had a pair of wings on their backs, and they liked to whiz around and play with one another. They were supposed to be harbingers of fortune. As Sun Jiashu quickly read out the numbers on the account books in his mind, the tiny golden figures flew onto the abacus to push its beads and perform calculations. The abacus had been passed down in the Sun clan for generations, but aside from that and the tiny golden children, all of the other items in the study were very ordinary and mundane, including even the oil lamp sitting on the table, which Sun Jiashu occasionally had to add oil to. The ancestral teachings of the Sun clan mandated that money had to be used as sparingly as possible, and that even a single copper coin was a valuable piece in foundation of the clan. On the other hand, when time came to spend, even enormous investments were to be made without any hesitation. Whenever he stood up to add oil to the lamp, Sun Jiashu would make his way over to the window and take a short break as he looked out at the river. He was a 5th-tier qi refiner, and as he looked out the window once again, he suddenly began communicating to the guest elders outside the ancestral residence through mental transmission. "I propose a bet. Does anyone want to take me up on it? If I lose, I'll pay 1 grain rain coin, but if the 3 of you lose, Then you have to look after our Sun clan's ancestral residence for 100 more years. Of course, you'll still be receiving the same compensation as usual." The logger smiled as he scoffed. "Who would take up such a ridiculous bet? It's way too skewed in your favor." Sun Jiashu smiled as he replied, "I'm going to bet that once the sun rises, Qian Pingan will be met with the same phenomenon as this morning. How does that sound?" "Let's do it," the 3 guest elders replied in unison. If he lost, he would only be losing 3 grain rain coins, but if he won, then the Sun clan would be able to enjoy the services of 3 golden core tier chi refiners for another century. With some luck, at least one of them should be able to reach the nascent tier during that time. The 3 guest elders were also aware of this, but they were convinced that Sun Jiashu wouldn't win the bet. For them, a single grain rain coin was virtually negligible, but they wanted to secure the bragging rights of winning a bet over Sun Jiashu. Sun Jiashu then smiled as he pulled 3 grain rain coins out of his sleeve before placing them onto the windowsill, then said in a self-deprecating manner, "It seems like I've already lost the bet." The 3 guest elders didn't hesitate to claim their winnings, and the 3 grain rain coins vanished into thin air. The final one to claim his grain rain coin was actually the one with the most advanced cultivation base among the 3, and he had the highest hopes of reaching the nascent tier. A smile appeared on Sun Jiashu's face as he continued to stand at the window, waiting for the moment that Qian Pingan opened his eyes from his standing meditation. Meanwhile, the tiny golden children were all looking up at Sun Jiashu with curious looks on their faces, wondering why their owner suddenly didn't seem interested in earning money anymore. The sun slowly began to rise up in the sky, and before long, the entirety of Old Dragon City had already been bathed in a warm red glow. As the sun continued to rise, the cloud and mist faded, and no remarkable phenomena emerged. Even though he had just lost 3 grain rain coins, Sun Jiashu was completely unbothered. The 3 guest elders were naturally very pleased, and all of them were making fun of Sun Jiashu. The patriarch of the Sun clan arrived in the study, and as a nascent tier chi refiner, he was able to temporarily cut off the study's connection with the outside world with just a wave of his hand. A smile then appeared on his face as he consoled, "Do you see now? Your grandfather told you long ago that the Sun clan's unorthodox luck has already been completely exhausted by that ability of yours, so you should just focus on sticking to the straight and narrow." Sun Jiashu heaved a forlorn sigh, and a thought suddenly occurred to him as he bade farewell to the Sun clan patriarch, then made his way toward the door with a smile as he said, "I'm going to the kitchen to tell Old Man Song to make a more simple breakfast this morning instead of wasting all those good ingredients. It's not like Qian Pingan can tell what's good or bad anyway. Perhaps he prefers a meal of pickled vegetables and steamed buns. Instead of wasting money on someone who doesn't appreciate it, I should save some money." The Sun clan patriarch nodded in approval with a smile on his face, then turned to tiny golden children on the old abacus with a hint of pride on his face. The Fu clan was indeed wealthier than the Sun clan, but when it came to these golden wealth-bringing children of the highest caliber, the Fu clan only had a single pair. To be accurate, they had 3, but only 2 of them were twins. In contrast, the Sun clan had as many as 4. As for the other 4 major clans of Old Dragon City, only the Feng clan had managed to buy a single one from the emperor of a major empire right before it fell to its demise. Sure enough, Qian Pingan's appetite was significantly improved by the familiar meal of rice congee, steamed buns, and pickled vegetables served up to him, and he was munching down food like a starving whirlwind. Sun Jiashu was seated across from Qian Pingan, eating more slowly while also displaying far better table manners, but his appetite was also better than it normally was. It seemed that one's appetite inevitably improved in the presence of someone else displaying an exceptional appetite. After that, Qian Pingan returned to the river and began fishing in earnest, and he was quickly reeling in fish left, right, and center. Half of the fish basket was filled with a type of fish colloquially known as white strips in Old Dragon City, while the rest of the basket was filled with miscellaneous fish such as yellowhead catfish and dark sleepers. After a lunch feast of fish, Sun Jiashu made Qian Pingan put on a disguise to alter his appearance, following which the nascent tier Sun clan patriarch led him to a pond outside the ancestral residence. As the Sun clan patriarch swept a sleeve over the mirror-like surface of the pond, an image of a building appeared, and the old man assured Qian Pingan that he could step into the pond to reach his destination right away. Qian Pingan had packed away his sword-nurturing gourd, so the only thing that he was carrying was the sword case on his back, and he did as he was told, stepping into the pond without any hesitation. Instead of plunging into the water, he set foot onto the surface of the pond, and a series of ripples spread over the water beneath his feet. After he had taken a few more steps forward, he abruptly vanished from the spot, as if he had walked into the mirror surface. In the next instant, Qian Pingyan emerged in front of a building, and he looked around to find that this was the exact same scene that had been depicted on the surface of the pond. Over at the Sun clan's ancestral residence, the old man was watching the rippling surface of the pond as he turned to Sun Jiaxu and remarked, "That boy has an incredibly stable soul and a remarkable backbone. No wonder Lu Baqiao sees him as a friend." "That's not the reason why he sees Qian Pingyan as a friend," Sun Jiaxu replied with a smile and a shake of his head. "What about you? Do you see him as a friend?" the old man asked. Sun Jiaxu thought about the question for a moment, then replied, "We didn't meet during times of crisis, so my bond with him cannot compare with that between him and Lu Baqiao." Meanwhile, there was already someone waiting for Qian Pingyan in the inner city of Old Dragon City. It was none other than the Golden Courtier Immortal of the Sun Clan, and he led Qian Pingyan into a spacious courtyard, where they emerged from a secretive side exit before getting onto a horse-drawn carriage already waiting for them. The Golden Courtier Immortal's aura was restrained, and he served as Qian Pingyan's coach driver. In the end, the carriage stopped at the entrance of an alley, where there was a young locust tree nearby, beneath the shade of which was a man eating sunflower seeds while reading a book. Qian Pingyan got out of the carriage, and the two of them looked at each other. The man picked up his stool in silence, then made his way into the alley, while the old man from the Sun Clan stopped the carriage by the side of the street, then closed his eyes to rest instead of accompanying Qian Pingyan any further. Upon reaching the medicinal shop, Zhang Dafeng set the stool down at the entrance, then asked Qian Pingyan to take a seat before grabbing another stool for himself. All of the female employees in the shop immediately gathered around to see who this new visitor was, but the disguise that Qian Pingyan had adopted was very unremarkable in appearance, so they quickly lost interest and dispersed again. Zhang Dafeng smiled as he asked, "Why have you taken the risk to come here when you've already undone the true Qi eight-tailed talismans on your own? I recall correctly, you have a vendetta against young city lord Fu Nanhua, don't you? Aren't you afraid of being discovered and captured? If you're thinking that the Sun Clan would step in to save you, then I must tell you that you're being far too naive." Qian Pingyan paid no heed to Zhang Dafeng's questions as he posed a string of questions of his own. "Who told you about my father and my bonded porcelain? Who killed my father? And does old man Yang have anything to do with this?" Zhang Dafeng wore a calm smile as he chuckled. "Do you think I would tell you even if that old geezer had something to do with this?" Qian Pingyan offered no response. Zhang Dafeng used the book in his hand to fan himself as he said, "I don't care if you believe me or not. I can assure you that he played no part in all of this. However, what I can also tell you is that he definitely saw what was happening at a very early stage, but he most likely didn't think there was any point in stepping in, so he didn't intervene. If you resent him for his inaction, then that's up to you, and I won't try to stop you." Qian Pingyan shook his head with a wry smile as he said, "Why would I resent him for that? I know old man Yang's personality very well. He never owes anyone anything, nor does he allow others to owe him anything. Everything that he does is an even and balanced transaction." Zhang Dafeng nodded in response. "That's the correct mindset to have. Looks like I won't have to bash your head in after all. I was dreading having to do so, as the old geezer would definitely not have been happy with me." Qian Pingyan's expression remained unchanged, and it seemed that he had already anticipated that Zhang Dafeng would have such a fiery personality. Zhang Dafeng continued to fan himself as he said, "Among all of the children from back then, if we set aside their respective heritages and backers, the ones that I thought had the most potential were Ma Kuxuan of Apricot Blossom Alley, Zhao Yao of Fortune Street, and Song Jisun of Clay Vase Alley. In contrast, my senior brother Li Er, who you know as the father of Li Lu and Li Huai, held you in the highest regard, and I thought he was an idiot for that. After that, you encountered all types of phenomenal opportunities after leaving Jewel's small world, and only then did I come to realize that I had misjudged your potential, and that I was also wrong about my senior brother. In the past, I thought both of you were idiots, but the joke is on me now." What Zhang Dafeng actually wanted to say was that both Li Er and Qian Pingyan were incredibly intelligent people. "I didn't dare to raise those questions to old man Yang, and I knew that I wouldn't be receiving any answers anyway, but I felt like I could raise those questions to you," Qian Pingyan said. Zhang Dafeng smiled as he asked, "Do you think you're safe just because you have a golden core tier Qi refiner protecting you?" Qian Pingyan shook his head as he replied, "If I raise any questions that concern sensitive information to old man Yang, he'd kill me without any hesitation. However, I didn't think you would dare to do that. Even if my guess proved to be incorrect, I may still be able to survive, and you'll have to pay a heavy price for killing me. What Qian Pingyan actually wanted to say was that even though Zhang Dafeng was also a businessman, he could tell that Zhang Dafeng's status and cultivation base were far inferior to Old Man Yang's. However, as Qian Pingyan articulated those questions, which had been weighing on him for an entire decade, he still felt a strong sense of unease. Thankfully, after reaching the 4th tier, he was able to control his own mental state and put on a calm and relaxed facade. Furthermore, as soon as he entered the alley with Zhang Dafeng, he had already pulled out his sword nurturing gourd to begin drinking. With 1st, 15th, and that golden courtier Qi refiner from the Sun Clan on his side, he was confident in his chances of survival, even if things were to go awry. It was time for some old wounds to be split open and examined for what they were. Looking at the serious expression on Qian Pingyan's face, Zhang Dafeng heaved a faint sigh, then rolled up the book in his hand before using it to gently drum on his own knee as he said in a lazy voice, "You've become even more annoying than before. You can pretend to be calm and relaxed all you want, but I can tell that you're tense as a bowstring on the inside. There's no need to be so tense. I'm getting tired just from looking at you. Rest assured I won't kill you. Old Man Yang holds you in very high regard at the moment, and even if that weren't the case, I wouldn't kill you just because you asked me a few questions. No matter how petty I am, I wouldn't resort to such extreme measures over something so trivial. However, I'm not going to answer your first 2 questions. You'll just have to find out those answers on your own." A smile suddenly appeared on Zhang Dafeng's face as he continued, "Why aren't you directly asking Qi Jingchen?" Qian Pingyan was significantly more at ease upon hearing this, and gently leaned back against his sword case, which was resting against the wall. He then took a swig of wine before giving a perplexing response. "I'm worried that Mr. Qi will be disappointed in me." All of a sudden, Zhang Dafeng turned around and yelled, "Mayor, bring out some sunflower seeds for our guest." A voluptuous woman soon emerged from the shop, holding 2 dishes of snacks with a smile on her face. As she bent down to hand the dishes to Zhang Dafeng, he feigned a startled expression as he exclaimed, "My goodness! I thought there was a pair of mountains crashing down upon me." The woman thrust the pair of dishes into Zhang Dafeng's hands, then hurriedly stood up straight again as she stomped on his foot and complained with a seductive smile, "Stop being so corny." Zhang Dafeng handed one of the dishes to Qian Pingyan, then began to eat sunflower seeds himself. Qian Pingyan seemed to have already anticipated that he wouldn't be receiving any answers from Zhang Dafeng, and he wasn't disheartened in the slightest as he asked, "Do you have any good swordsmanship manuals that you can sell me? Do you want immortal swordsmanship manuals used by Qi refiners, or ones used by martial artists?" Zhang Dafeng asked. "I'm sure you can tell that my bridge of immortality has been severed, so if I want to practice swordsmanship, then my only option is to do so as a pure martial artist," Qian Pingyan replied. "I can find you even the best swordsmanship manuals under the heavens, then sell them to you at an astronomical price, but there's no fun in that," Zhang Dafeng said. "I advise you not to go around searching for any such scriptures on your own. I am a martial artist myself, and I know all of the pitfalls involved in these matters. Seeing as you've already made some decent progress in your fist techniques, you should just stick to that instead of wasting your time with other futile pursuits." Qian Pingyan chewed on a peanut for a moment with a thoughtful expression, then said in an earnest manner, "Thank you. For that piece of advice alone, I can waive the 5 copper coins that you owe me." Zhang Dafeng's eyelids twitched slightly upon hearing this. All of a sudden, he found Qian Pingyan to be far more likable than just a moment ago. He stretched lazily as he sat on his stool, then said in an exasperated manner, "Can you take off that shit on your face? You were never that handsome to begin with, and you look even more terrible with that disguise on." Qian Pingyan shook his head in response. "You already mentioned that I have a vendetta against Fu Nanhua, so I have to be careful under these circumstances. Who's to say that the Fu clan doesn't have any way to observe the entire city? If I were to show my true appearance, that would be equivalent to me standing on their doorstep and yelling for them to come and kill me. As soon as I step out onto the street, I'm going to be mobbed and beaten to death." Zhang Dafeng couldn't help but burst into laughter and he revealed, "There's no need for you to be so worried. Old Man Yang told me that if you can remove the true Qi 8-tail talismans on your own, then I have to ensure your safety in this city. Even if you had a death wish and swaggered over to the entrance of Fu City, I still have to make sure that you leave this city alive. You know what? I never realized it before, but I'm coming to realize now that you have a really good name. You can protect me in Old Dragon City?" Qian Pingyan asked with a skeptical expression. Are you a mountain summit tier martial artist or a chi refiner of the upper 5 tiers? Zhang Dafeng burst into laughter once again as he snapped. What do you take 9th tier martial artists and unpolished jade tier chi refiners for? Heads of cabbage that are sold for a copper coin a dozen? No matter how perilous Old Dragon City is, 8th tier martial artists and 10th tier earth immortals are unmatched here. Of course, that's as long as you don't provoke all of the major clans at once. The Fu clan may be the most powerful clan in the city, but I can still keep you safe from them. The Fu clan's nascent tier patriarchs are only 9th tier chi refiners, yet they're already considered to be almighty deities here. Zhang Dafeng rolled his eyes as he continued. Were you thinking that this place is just like our Jewel's small world? A place where a martial artist at the pinnacle of the 8th tier can only serve as a gatekeeper? Where the 11th tier Ruanqiong could only work as a swordsmith prior to taking over as sage? Where even Imperial Preceptor Cui Chan of the Great Li Empire only dared to sneak in like a timid little rat? Are you plotting something by asking me to remove my disguise? Chen Ping'an suddenly asked. I didn't think you would be able to tell. Zhang Dafeng exclaimed with a surprised expression. All of a sudden, a wisp of smoke emerged from a shadow in a nearby corner, and it took on the form of a Yin god. It sneered. Right now Zhang Dafeng is completely and utterly perplexed. He doesn't understand what Dao mentors and Dao guardians are supposed to do, so he asked the Fan clan to find him a fortune teller at a very steep price, and he was told that he had to pull out the chestnuts from the fire. In other words, he must rescue something or someone from peril. Hence, he wants to place you in harm's way, then swoop in to save you, after which I would escort you out of Old Dragon City. During this time, perhaps he would be able to understand what the roles of Dao Mentor and Dao Guardian entailed, and if he were to fulfill the fortune that had been told, perhaps that would serve as a catalyst for him to ascend to the 9th tier. Chen Ping'an turned back to look at Zhang Dafeng, who remained completely unfazed, even after being exposed, and the former said, You can owe me the 5 copper coins for now. Even if you want to return them to me, I won't accept them. Zhang Dafeng gave a casual shrug in response. It's just 5 copper coins, it doesn't really matter to me whether you're going to claim them or not. A cold smile appeared on Chen Ping'an's face as he scoffed. Zhang Dafeng, do you really think that I don't know Old Man Yang's rules? I intentionally mentioned those 5 copper coins before asking you to find a swordsmanship manual for me, and only after receiving that earnest piece of advice from you did I decide to waive your debt. If I'm not mistaken, Old Man Yang was the one who wanted me to deliver letters back home, and it was also him who told you to owe me money, right? You must be kicking yourself right now, aren't you? After that, Chen Ping'an stowed his sword-nurturing gourd away again, then rose to his feet before setting the empty dish down onto his stool. He then cupped his fist in a salute toward the Yin god as he said, I don't know why you were willing to reveal the truth to me. Perhaps you were merely acting under Old Man Yang's instructions, but I still have to thank you. The Yin god nodded in response and Chen Ping'an departed. Just as Chen Ping'an had said, Zhang Dafeng was indeed kicking himself. There was a very good chance that the Yin god had just foiled his prophesied fortune, and he turned to it with a cold expression. Why did you tell him the truth? Was that your decision, or was it what the old man wanted? Why don't you take a guess? The Yin god asked in an indifferent manner. A carefree smile suddenly appeared on Zhang Dafeng's face as he said, You would never do something on your own, so it must be what the old man wanted. A mocking sneer appeared on the Yin god's face as it scoffed. You're a pure martial artist at the pinnacle of the 8th tier and the disciple of a divine lord. Yet you're going around seeking out the services of fortune tellers. Are you not aware that you're no ordinary person? Even if the Fan clan hadn't tampered with your fortune reading, a fortune reading for the average person could mean something the exact opposite for you. A serious look appeared on Zhang Dafeng's face as he nodded in response. Thank you for enlightening me. The Yin god paid no heed to his words of gratitude. The Divine Lord has been kind enough to assign you to this post, so you should cherish the opportunity and do what you've been told, instead of trying to outsmart the Divine Lord. Zhang Dafeng waved a dismissive hand as he grumbled. First I get screwed over by Chen Ping'an, and now you're teaching me a lesson. What a terrible day. I need to go out and get some fresh air. The Yin god quickly vanished. Was the phenomenon at the Sun Clan's ancestral residence triggered by Chen Ping'an's breakthrough? Zhang Dafeng suddenly asked. I would presume so, the Yin god replied from the shadow in the corner. Zhang Dafeng tucked the book in his hand under his armpit, then carried his stool and his sunflower seeds to the entrance of the alley, where he began spying on the beautiful women passing by again. Right at this moment, A tall and authoritative-looking man dressed in very simple attire began to approach him, and trailing along behind him was a beautiful young woman. The man made his way over to Zheng Dafeng's side, while the young woman stopped behind the man, and she was looking at Zheng Dafeng with an intrigued expression on her face. The man smiled as he said, "Looks like you were right, shopkeeper Zheng. Sun Jiashu really did only assign him a disguise for his protection." Zheng Dafeng turned to take a glance at the man, then remarked, Well, if it isn't Fu Qi. The fact that you're not even wearing your old dragon robe tells me that you're not here to evict me." The man smiled as he pointed at the young woman behind him and replied, "Here in Old Dragon City, it doesn't matter if I'm wearing the old dragon robe or not. The fact that I've brought her with me is the real gesture of sincerity." This was both a display of weakness and an act of intimidation. The intimidatory element was the implication that Fu Qi would be able to chase Zheng Dafeng out of Old Dragon City even without doing so himself, while the display of weakness was reflected in the fact that Fu Qi was willing to appease Zheng Dafeng by bringing to him a young woman with long legs. Zheng Dafeng took a few lustful glances at the young woman's legs, then turned his gaze back to the pedestrians walking along the street as he scoffed, "You sure have a big mouth, Fu Qi. Be careful you don't bite off more than you can chew." Fu Qi's expression instantly darkened slightly, and only after grabbing onto a jade pendant hanging from his waist did his expression revert back to normal. Meanwhile, a fearful look had appeared on the young woman's face. This was the first time she had ever seen him make such an apparent outward display of anger. A cold sneer appeared on Zheng Dafeng's face as he scoffed, "We may both be businessmen, but you can't even begin to compare with me." Fu Qi smiled as he said, "I can tell that you're not in a good mood right now, so I'll come and visit you some other time." Indeed, Zheng Dafeng's mood was currently as foul could be. 5 copper coins was a trivial sum of money, even for the average mortal, yet these 5 copper coins were weighing down on his heart like 5 mountains. He had been extremely careful and meticulous, finally goading Qian Ping'an into waiving the debt. In reality, from the 3 questions raised by Qian Ping'an and that seemingly errant remark of Old Man Yang never owes anyone anything, Zheng Dafeng already knew that there was no chance that Qian Ping'an would ask him to repay those 5 copper coins. Despite his young age, the boy was as cunning as a fox. Zheng Dafeng was absolutely furious, and began fanning himself vigorously with the book in his hand as he grumbled, "No wonder I disliked him from the very beginning. He's so shrewd and cunning at such a young age. He's not like an innocent boy at all." A deflated look then appeared on his face as he sighed. Then again, if he were just an ordinary young boy, then he would have never survived to this day. After that, Zheng Dafeng began to flip through the pages of his book with a frustrated look on his face, and he wasn't able to take in even a single word that he read. As he did so, he murmured to himself, "Could it be that thing's right? Have I really outsmarted myself?" Right at this moment, Zheng Dafeng landed on a page with a title that read Chapter of Sincerity. The chapter consisted of a bunch of cliched parables thrown together with a few pieces of pretentious commentary at the end. The way that everything had been thrown together so haphazardly was almost blasphemous to the classic parables included in the chapter. In the eyes of someone as intelligent and highly educated as Zheng Dafeng, it was as if someone had tried to put together a beautiful woman out of parts and ended up with an abomination. It had the elegant eyes and brows of one woman, the rosy cheeks of another, the cherry lips of a third. All of the individual parts were quite beautiful to behold on their own, but when thrown together, it was nothing short of a hideous disaster. Zheng Dafeng flipped over one more page in an absent-minded manner. That page contained the final section of the chapter of sincerity, which consisted of more vague and vapid principles. It said that those who display the utmost sincerity can touch even the coldest and most jaded of hearts. Hence, sincerity is an integral trait for followers of Confucianism. A Taoist sage has also once stated that without sincerity, one cannot truly move others, and that those who truly know themselves are referred to as enlightened, and can display the utmost sincerity. Zheng Dafeng quickly flipped over to the next page, which contained the chapter of filial piety, and he quickly flipped through that chapter as well. Before long, he had flipped through the entire book, and he closed it in a frustrated manner before using it to fan himself again. It was as if all of the sagely teachings in the book were mere gusts of wind blowing past his ears. In the end, a resigned look appeared on his face as he sighed to himself, "The old man has already told me that I'll never be able to reach the 9th tier, so what's the point in trying to force the issue? I've already been striving for so many years in futility. No wonder the old man always says that I'm too smart for my own good. How many times have I fought Li Er? Song Chongjing was able to make a breakthrough after fighting senior brother Li just once. Yet I haven't been able to make any progress even after countless attempts. I've always known that this is something that can't be forced, but I've been hoping against hope for a miracle that's never going to come. So be it. I guess I'll just stay in Old Dragon City and stare at women all day long, stuck at the 8th tier until the day I die. A dejected look appeared on his face as he closed his eyes, no longer spying on the beautiful women passing him by. Nearby was a young woman with a physique that could only be described as brawny. She was dressed in extremely vibrant attire, while her face was covered in makeup. As she stopped in her tracks and witnessed Zheng Dafeng's dejected display, a hint of sympathy immediately welled up in her heart. In her eyes, it was clear that Zheng Dafeng wanted to confess his feelings to her, but was too embarrassed to do so. With that in mind, she decided that she had to make the first move instead of placing the onus upon him. Hence, she took a deep breath, yet right before she could speak, Zheng Dafeng's eyes had abruptly sprung open, and he rushed back into the alley with his stool like the wind. She heaved a faint sigh as she stroked her own cheek, lamenting herself for her own stunning beauty. Perhaps if she weren't so beautiful, then the man of her dreams wouldn't be too intimidated to confess his feelings to her. All of a sudden, her expression stiffened slightly as she realized that she was rubbing off the makeup on her face, and she hurriedly tried to rub the makeup back onto her face. Instead of returning to Fu City with his daughter using any mystical abilities, the two of them casually strolled back to Fu City, while a horse-drawn carriage slowly trundled along behind them. This young woman was Fu Chunhua. She was Fu Qi's eldest daughter, which meant that just like Fu Donghai, Fu Qi's eldest son, she was one of the candidates to become Fu Qi's heir as clan leader. The heir to the position of clan leader was going to inherit the old dragon robe as well, and they had to possess exceptional aptitude. On the surface, it appeared that Fu Qi was a middle-aged man, but in reality, he was already over 400 years old and a 10th-tier cultivator. Of course, he didn't have as resounding a reputation as Li Tuanjing of Wind Lightning Field, who was known as the most powerful 10th-tier cultivator on Eastern Treasured Vile Continent and the most formidable cultivator under the upper 5 tiers, but with his old dragon robe and the Fu clan's 4 pseudo-celestial tools at his disposal, his powers weren't inferior to those of an unpolished jade-tier immortal. Fu Chunhua was also already close to 300 years of age, and both she and Fu Donghai were established golden core tier cultivators. Furthermore, both of them were very adept in battle, with each of them having escorted one of the Fu clan's ships during its journeys to Stalactite Mountain and back for over a century. Both of them were seasoned combatants who had engaged in battles of life and death against deep-sea great demons on more than just a few occasions. Most importantly, all members of the Fu clan who reached the golden core tier were granted a pseudo-celestial tool, so it had always been said that the cultivation bases of the Fu clan's top chi refiners had to be regarded as half a tier above their actual cultivation bases. After much hesitation, Fu Chunhua finally mustered up some courage before asking, "Father, why did you take me to see that man instead of Nanhua? Didn't I already tell you that I brought you with me as a show of our Fu clan's sincerity?" The intelligence that we gathered on Shopkeeper Zheng clearly stated that he likes beautiful women with long legs. Fu Qi replied with a smile. Fu Chunhua was completely unconvinced. Even though she was the one of the candidates to become Fu Qi's heir, she knew full well, just as Fu Donghai and Fu Nanhua did, that the connections that they had painstakingly established were nowhere near enough for them to get a peek into what things were truly like at the very pinnacle of Eastern Treasured Vile Continent. Furthermore, while there were certainly many benefits to having Fu Qi for a father, there were also plenty of restrictions, and they were often very fearful of crossing certain lines in case doing so earned their father's disapproval. In the Fu clan, it seemed like everyone had a high degree of freedom, but those who had no hopes of ever taking over as clan leader had already been banished out of the core circle of decision-makers. In contrast, for those who were in this core circle, the rules that they had to abide by were no less stringent than those in major empires. Over the past century, Fu Donghai had been responsible for managing relations with complete Reed continent to the north, while Fu Chunhua had been tasked with managing relations with the continent to the southeast. Previously, Fu Nanhua had just been an unremarkable sibling of theirs, but in a surprise twist, he had been selected to travel to Jewel's small world. Only after that did he embark on his meteoric rise, with much of the clan's resources being allocated to him. From this, it was clear that Fu Qi hadn't been very happy with how Fu Donghai and Fu Chunhua had performed over the past century. Fu Chunhua knew that she wasn't going to get a truthful answer to her question, so she changed the subject as she asked, "Should I go and issue a warning to Sun Jiashu?" Sun Jiashu? Fu Qi scoffed. His cultivation base may be inferior to yours, but he's still the leader of the Sun clan. What right does a golden courtier chi refiner like you have to issue a warning to him? A nascent tier patriarch is currently staying in the Sun clan's ancestral residence, and as for the other golden courtier chi refiner, he's only just beginning to display signs of turning to our side after several decades of meticulous efforts from your brother. If our Fu clan were to try and intimidate Sun Jiashu now, do you think that golden courtier chi refiner would be able to lay down his pride to defect to our Fu clan? Fu Chuanhua's face instantly turned deathly pale. She was horrified that her father would misconstrue her intentions and think that she was trying to foil her brother's plans. Fu Qi smiled as he reassured. There's no need to be nervous. I'm well aware of your personality. Sun Jiashu has chosen to place his bets on Qian Pingyan on this occasion in order to test our Fu clan, and I'm guessing that he's eagerly looking forward to seeing us take action against him. If we do try to intimidate him, he'll immediately return to the Sun clan's ancestral manner, putting on a pitiable display as if he were being oppressed by our Fu clan. That golden courtier chi refiner only decided to offer his services to the Sun clan as he was indebted to them, so if we were to exert any pressure on Sun Jiashu now, he would never make the decision to defect to our Fu clan. Is Sun Jiashu not worried that we'll kill that boy? Fu Kunlu asked. Fu Qi looked up at the sky as he replied, It's understandable that you would think this way. Only if you manage to inherit the old dragon robe someday, will you have the opportunity to know some of the things that are truly going on up there. Fu Chunhua looked up at the sea of clouds overhead upon hearing this. Even higher than that, Fu Qi said with a smile. A hint of longing appeared in Fu Chunhua's eyes as she attempted to peer through the sea of clouds. Prior to reaching the Golden Courtier, everyone was under the impression that the Golden Courtier was the pinnacle of cultivation, but only after reaching that tier would one realize that it was actually only halfway up the mountain of cultivation. Compared with the Sun Clan and Sun Jiashu, our Fu Clan and I are more decisive, Fu Qi suddenly said. Right now, I need to leave Old Dragon City to meet with a few esteemed guests that have come from the north. Go to Nanhua and tell him that Qian Pingyan is currently staying in the Sun Clan's ancestral residence. I want to see what choice he makes in response to this information, and that will decide whether he'll become the city lord of Old Dragon City. Of course, it'll also determine whether you still have any chance of inheriting the Old Dragon robe. I hope that by the time I return to Old Dragon City, the correct decision will have already been made. You can take the carriage back to the city. Fu Chunhua did as she was told, while Fu Qi sprang up into the sky, rising gracefully up into the sea of clouds overhead before setting off toward the north. Fu Chunhua didn't have the time to ponder who those esteemed guests could be to warrant a personal reception from the city lord of Old Dragon City. Instead, as she entered the carriage, she began to consider how she should proceed to maximize her own interests, as well as to ponder what decision Fu Nanhua was going to make. The more she pondered this conundrum, the more muddled her thoughts became. No matter what she did, she felt like she could reap some benefits, but ultimately, she would still end up very far from the best-case scenario that she had envisioned. Even as she arrived at Fu Nanhua's private residence, she still hadn't come to any conclusive decision, so she could only carefully relay Fu Qi's message to Fu Nanhua, while removing some parts and adding others. Fu Nanhua naturally wasn't going to fully believe her, but he knew that there was also no way that Fu Chunhua would dare to completely fabricate a message from Fu Qi. After listening to what Fu Chunhua had to say, Fu Nanhua stood up from his chair, and he was just about to begin pacing, a habit that he had developed whenever he had to think about something, when he suddenly sat back down as he declared, I've made my decision. Qian Pingyan has to die. Fu Chunhua smiled as she said, Shopkeeper Zheng of the Dust Medicinal Shop is a martial artist who's at least at the pinnacle of the 7th tier, and he could even be at the 8th tier. He has very close ties with the Fu clan, and on top of that, the Sun clan also has a nascent tier patriarch and 3 other Golden Courtier guest elders. They don't need to do anything unless the Sun clan's ancestral residence is under threat, but if push comes to shove, I think Superior Grandmaster will most likely be able to convince those 3 to intervene, and that's still not even taking into account all of the Sun clan's other guest elders in the inner city. Are you sure you don't want to reconsider, Nanhua? The only thing I'm considering right now is how to kill Qian Pingyan at as little a cost as possible to myself, Fu Nanhua replied with a cold expression. Your wedding is coming up soon. Are you not afraid that something will go wrong right on the cusp of such an important occasion? Additionally, that boy came from Jewel's small world, so he's technically a citizen of the Great Li Empire. Are you not worried that killing him will tarnish the image of our Fu clan in the eyes of the Great Li Empire's emperor? Fu Kunlu asked. Fu Nanhua offered no response to this. Have a long hard think about this, Fu Nanhua, Fu Chunhua said as her smile widened. By telling you all of this, am I hoping that you'll lash out at Chun Ping'an, or am I hoping that you'll stay your hand? Fu Nanhua continued to remain silent. As the silence continued, the smile on Fu Chunhua's face gradually faded until it disappeared altogether, and a cold look appeared in her eyes as she scrutinized Fu Nanhua, the useless piece of trash who had only managed to reach the 6th tier even after wasting an unfathomable amount of resources from the clan. How dare he even consider himself a possible heir to their father's position as city lord? What right did he have to compete against her in Fudonghai, a pair of golden core tier chi refiners, for inheritance of the old dragon robe? Fu Nanhua slowly rose to his feet in a smooth and graceful fashion, and a faint smile appeared on his face as he said, Fu Chunhua, our mother isn't the only one who knows about all of the putrid things going on between you and Fudonghai. I'm very curious. Do you know about the filthy dealings between Fudonghai and your personal maidservant? My good little brother, you'll surely be well looked after once Fudonghai or I become the city lord, Fu Chunhua said with a smile. Fu Nanhua seemed to be completely oblivious to Fu Chunhua's thinly veiled threat as he said, Before that, we have to work together as siblings to devise a plan to kill Chun Ping'an, don't we? After all, you have no idea what our father is thinking right now, and you don't know whether this decision of mine is getting you closer to inheriting the position of clan leader or pushing you further away. Not only is this a test for me, it's just as much as a test for you, so you have to be careful with how you proceed, my good sister. Fu Chunhua's eyes narrowed slightly as a cold look appeared on her face. Fu Nanhua rose to his feet, then cast his gaze toward the entrance of his private residence as he mused internally, Sunjiashu, are you really going to sacrifice Chun Ping'an just for a nascent tier chi refiner? Is that really a worthy trade? Or could it be? Fu Nanhua shook his head to rid himself of that train of thought. Sun Jiashu wasn't a madman, so there was no way that was possible. Only in this moment did Fu Nanhua truly begin to hesitate, and a hint of agitation welled up in his heart. Fu Chunhua had watched this little brother of hers grow up his entire life, but he suddenly felt extremely unfamiliar to him, and for the first time, a sense of foreboding welled up in her heart toward her previously unremarkable and innocuous little brother. After Fu Qi flew out of the city, he stopped in his tracks high up in the sky, then descended upon a ship that had come from Parasol Tree Mountain of the Great Li Empire. On the ship was a Mahas swordsman by the name of Surua with a sword slung across his back, and the old flood dragon who was an assistant mountain master of Forest Deer Academy. With these two on the ship, it would definitely be safe even on a trip to Stalactite Mountain. The two of them were tasked with protecting a young boy and a young girl. Strictly speaking, only the former was truly under their protection, and it was none other than Prince Songmu of the Great Li Empire. The young girl's name was Jigue, and she was trailing along behind Songmu in an obedient and docile fashion. The entire time she didn't take even a single glance at Fu Qi, who wasn't wearing his old dragon robe. On top of that, he hadn't declared who he was, and he was currently standing on the ship, engaged in some small talk with Songjisen Surua, so perhaps he had failed to recognize him. The ship passed straight through the sea of clouds above Old Dragon City before landing in the Fu City. After arranging places to stay for these esteemed guests from the Great Li Empire, Fu Qi arrived at Fu Nanhua's private manor to find that he was leaning against a coiling dragon pillar with a dazed and dispirited look on his face. "Why do you look so glum?" Fu Qi asked. Fu Nanhua turned to his father as he replied, "I've been thinking about many things, but no matter what decision I make, it all seems to be wrong. The Fu clan, Old Dragon City, the Great Li Empire, Jewel Small World, Sunjiashu, Fudonghai, Fu Chunhua." A smile suddenly appeared on Fu Qi's face as he asked, "Are you aware that no matter what decision you make, you are guaranteed to become the next city lord of Old Dragon City?" Fu Nanhua was completely taken aback to hear this. All of a sudden, Fu Qi turned to the side before lowering his head, as if he were welcoming an extremely important guest. A young girl made her way into the hall while greedily sucking in dragon chi without any reservation. She was looking slightly inebriated as she sat down onto a chair, then raised her hands and clapped. A dragon robe emerged behind her alongside a cloud of mist, as if the robe were being cleansed by a cloud of water vapor. She rose to her feet, and the dragon robe draped itself over her, while the 9 golden dragons in the sea of clouds embroidered onto the robe began to roam over its surface in an extremely lifelike fashion. She kicked off her boots before sitting back down onto the chair with her legs crossed, and the severely oversized dragon robe was looking rather comical on her. Her face was puckered with indignation as he sighed. It's been really hard work pretending that I'm just a powerless little girl even after the restrictions of Jewel's small world are gone. I suppose it can't be helped. There are still some people that I'm no match for at the moment. That stupid Taoist priest Ruanxiong Songchongjing, the leader of Moism, Sword Immortal Suro. There are almost too many of them to count. Forget it. Thinking about them is only making me even more depressed. This is a far better place than Jewel's small world. As expected of such a great place. Even after so many years, your Fu clan has done very well to preserve so much dragon qi. You'll be rewarded handsomely for your efforts. Fu Nanhua turned to the familiar young girl, then turned to look at his father, who was standing off to the side with a calm expression, and finally, his gaze landed on the old dragon robe draped over the girl's petite body. He had almost gone insane once before, but this time he felt as if he were truly going insane. Ji Gui took a glance at her surrounding as she continued. I had to endure many indignities to come here, but the biggest of all of these indignities is that I was only able to make it here smoothly because that stinky Taoist priest allowed it to be so. All of a sudden, she stabbed a finger in Fu Nanhua's direction as she said in a scathing voice. You pathetic little ant. I hear that you don't even dare to kill Qian Pingyan. You're not even worthy of the... What's your clan's surname again? We are the Fu clan, young mistress, Fu Qi replied in a respectful manner. Ji Gui suddenly became completely deflated as she laid back against the chair, snuggled up inside the old dragon robe as if it were an oversized blanket. Fu Nanhua felt as if he were on the verge of losing his sanity. Ji Gui glanced down at the old dragon robe as she remarked, "This robe is quite nice. As expected of something that's harnessed the qi and essence of 9 past emperors of Eastern treasured vile continent." Having said that, the sea of clouds embroidered on the robe is a little lackluster. As she made this final remark, her golden eyes lit up with a hint of intrigue. Fu Qi seemed to be able to see what Ji Gui was thinking, and a wry smile appeared on his face as he said, "Young mistress, the sea of clouds above the city can't be withdrawn into the old dragon robe for now. Otherwise it'll attract too much attention, and someone could realize that something's amiss." I know, Ji Gui sighed in response, following which she closed her eyes in a drunken manner. Now that I'm here, I really don't want to move again. All of a sudden, she jumped down from the chair, and the old dragon robe, which had appeared like an oversized blanket just a moment ago, suddenly fit her perfectly. She was standing in the hall while looking outside, seemingly rather hesitant about something. Over at the Sun clan's ancestral residence, a wry smile appeared on the face of the nascent tier patriarch upon hearing Sun Jiashu's plan, and he asked, "Is that really worth it? Are you not afraid that after this battle, our Sun clan will fall from its pedestal and be completely devoured by the Fu clan and the other 4 major clans?" Sun Jiashu's expression remained unchanged as he replied, "Not at all. The only thing that I regret is that our Sun clan doesn't have more for me to gamble with. Otherwise, I'd raise the stakes even higher." The Sun clan patriarch was silent for a long while before asking, "What if that boy finds out about our Sun clan's intentions?" A determined look appeared in Sun Jiashu's eyes as he replied, "He won't find out, and even if he does, it still doesn't change the fact that our Sun clan has made a huge sacrifice for him, and I'm certain that we'll be repaid for the sacrifices that we've made. Is it really the right idea to be making such a radical move?" the Sun clan patriarch asked. "Can't you emulate what that boy did in his breakthrough to the 4th tier? Waiting for everything to fall into place naturally on their own? If I were representing only myself, of course I could wait, but the state of Eastern treasured vile continent and the world at large can't." Sun Jiashu replied with a shake of his head. The Sun clan patriarch could only heave a faint sigh, and he made no further attempt at persuasion. After that, Qian Pingyan returned to the Sun clan's ancestral residence from the inner city, and a period of peace followed. As usual, Sun Jiashu continued to pay occasional visits to the ancestral residence, and each time he did so, he would stay for a night, following which he would propose a bet to the 3 golden core tier guest elders. The first bet was for 1 grain rain coin, the second was for 2, the third was for 4, and the 4th bet was for 8 grain rain coins. In the end, Sun Jiashu lost all 4 bets, following which he proposed no further bets. As for Qian Pingyan, he would continue to go night fishing at the river every single day, waiting for the sun to rise. On the 20th day that Qian Pingyan was staying at the Sun clan's ancestral residence, Sun Jiashu was seated in a deep sleep in accordance with a Taoist meditation technique when he heard Qian Pingyan yell out from afar, "Sun Jiashu, look!" Sun Jiashu immediately rose to his feet, and without even putting on his boots, he rushed over to the window to look up at the sky. Around a dozen golden flood dragons were descending from the clouds in the east, and once again, they were beaten by Qian Ping'an without any hesitation, even though he had already been told that this was an opportunity that was not to be squandered. In this instant, Sun Jiashu could only look on in a complete daze, and his Dao heart very nearly collapsed. Fortunately, the Sun Clan patriarch hurriedly arrived by his side, then pressed a hand firmly down onto his shoulder as he consoled. There's no need to be so distraught, Jiashu. The cashew tree is an evergreen tree that thrives in all seasons, but a person cannot expect to thrive at all times. It's for a day that you were given this name. I was so close, Sun Jiashu murmured to himself with a deathly pale complexion. Even though his mental state was returning to stability, he was still feeling completely distraught, as if he had lost an entire Old Dragon City. In the inner city of Old Dragon City, Zhang Dafeng took a glance at the rising sun in the east, while standing in the alley outside the dust medicinal shop. All of a sudden, he pulled out his book, then flipped it to a certain page before reading the chapter of sincerity to himself in silence. After the phenomenon of golden flood dragons faded, Zhang Dafeng destroyed the book at once, leaving no trace of it behind, then made his way back into the alley with a sullen look on his face as he mused. I was wrong all this time. He's my Dao mentor. That night, Sun Jiashu was supposed to be meeting with a certain important figure from the great southeastern continent, but he made a last-minute decision to cancel this meeting. This was a very rude and inappropriate thing to do, to the point that the steward, who barely ever raised any objections to Sun Jiashu's decisions, couldn't help but ask him to reconsider. However, Sun Jiashu didn't reconsider, nor did he offer any explanation. Instead, he severed the communication between the Sun Clan's ancestral residence and the Sun Manor before making his way to the small ancestral hall in the back. The steward was left at a complete loss for what to do, and the Sun Clan's nascent tier patriarch knew that he had to step in. Hence, he appeared in the Sun Manor for the first time in over a century, then personally instructed the steward on how to handle this matter, instilling within him a great deal of calmness and reassurance. After taking a bath and changing into some new clothes, Sun Jiashu stood alone in the ancestral hall, offering up some incense before standing in silence, as if he were pondering his mistakes. Aside from spirit tablets, there were also portraits of the Sun Clan's past clan leaders hanging on the walls of the ancestral hall, most of whom were depicted wearing simple and unadorned attire like Sun Jiashu. Sun Jiashu had inherited the position of clan leader directly from his grandfather, while his father's generation had been skipped. After relieving himself of the position, Sun Jiashu's grandfather had left to travel the Middle Earth Divine Continent. At the time, Sun Jiashu had only been in his early 20s, and with such a massive responsibility dumped onto his shoulders, he had suffered through a great deal of hardships over the years. Sun Jiashu looked up at the portraits on the walls. Some of them had saved the clan during time of great peril, some had established new trade routes, some had befriended cultivators of the upper 5 tiers for the sake of the clan's prosperity, some had done nothing with their lives and had only negative impacts on the clan's development, some had made terrible decisions, forcing the Sun Clan to part with much of its territory in the outer city, some had strayed down the wrong path, becoming obsessed with cultivation and leaving the duty of overseeing the clan to others. Sun Jiashu really wanted to know how he was going to be seen by his descendants once he became one of the portraits on the walls. Was he going to be regarded as a shrewd and conscientious clan leader who had led the clan to new heights, an incompetent clan leader who had planted the seed for the clan's descent into ignominy, or a fool who had passed up an exceptionally rare opportunity? The nascent tier patriarch slowly made his way into the ancestral hall late at night, and after a long silence he finally consoled, given the law of 3 strikes, it's already quite remarkable that you had chosen to believe in that boy and bet on him 4 times, and there's certainly no shame in losing on the 5th time. The fact that the guest elder with hopes of reaching the nascent tier was willing to entertain your bets 4 times indicates that he's leaning more towards staying in the Sun Clan's ancestral residence over defecting to Fu. Donghai sighed. Sun Jiashu didn't turn around as he continued to stare at one of the portraits on the walls as he nodded and replied, I've already arrived at these conclusions myself, so I'm not overly bothered by these things. When it comes to those bets, they haven't improved the situation, nor have they made things any worse, so I can accept that outcome. Even if we do miss out on a future nascent tier guest elder, that's not something that will have a decisive impact on the fate of our Sun Clan. The Sun Clan patriarch wanted to say something, but ultimately refrained from doing so. What he wanted to ask concerned the foundation of Sun Jiashu's great Dao, and it would be inappropriate to pry into such matters, even for him. Similarly, even though the 3 guest elders in the Sun clan's ancestral residence were on very good terms with Sun Jiashu and were very curious about Qian Pingan's cultivation base, they still chose not to directly ask Sun Jiashu, merely speculating about and betting on the subject instead. Sun Jiashu spread open one of his hands as he said, "This entire time that I've been with Qian Pingan, I've been treating our relationship as a business opportunity. It's not that I don't see Lu Baqiao as a friend, it's just that Qian Pingan is so strange and difficult to understand that I can't help but want to make a big gamble on him. I can't help it. At my core, I'm a businessman and the Sun clan's leader. I've only come to realize now that knowing too much can also have its drawbacks." Sun Jiashu turned around and raised his splayed-out hand as he continued. Up to this point, the Fu clan has taken no action against Qian Pingan, and after he forced back those golden dragons a second time, my plan had entirely fallen through, leaving me to suffer the consequences. Only then did I realize just how terrible my decision had been, to the point that it had lost me an entire old dragon city. Even as a revered earth immortal, the Sun clan patriarch wasn't able to see anything special about Sun Jiashu's hand, but he was certain that through it, Sun Jiashu had already glimpsed the final truth. A grief-stricken look appeared on Sun Jiashu's face as he continued. If my decision had only cost me a friendship with Qian Pingan, who was never my friend to begin with, and an old dragon city, then I would have been able to bear the consequences, no matter how bitter a fruit it is to swallow. So what if I missed out? I can just earn more money in the future to make up for it. When it comes to the ability to make money, I don't lose to anyone. The Sun clan patriarch remained silent, waiting for Sun Jiashu to continue. Sun Jiashu slowly clenched his splayed hand into a tight fist, then continued in a trembling voice. Before this, my way of making money was one that I had always firmly believed was the correct path, one that follows the great Tao of commercialism and fits perfectly with the ancestral teachings of our clan. However, in the wake of this ordeal, after knowing Qian Pingan for only less than a month, it's been exposed to be nothing more than an incorrect and terribly misguided path. The founder of commercialism had long warned the followers of his teachings that money earned through unjust means was like flowing water, going just as quickly as it came, so it was definitely not to be pursued. Sun Jiashu turned to the side so that the Sun clan patriarch wouldn't be able to see his expression, and he also lowered his head slightly, seemingly not wanting to see the patriarch's expression either. The Sun clan patriarch slowly made his way over to Sun Jiashu's side as he said, "The mistakes have already been made. Are you just going to allow yourself to be defeated and do nothing to make amends?" Sun Jiashu raised his hands in front of himself before gently blowing onto them as he replied, "For some reason, the Fu clan decided not to make a move, and that's left me in a very difficult position. Most importantly, even now, I still don't know what Qian Pingan thinks of me and what kind of person he is. That is the main predicament that I'm facing." The Sun clan patriarch's brows furrowed slightly as he said, "It's difficult to say what Qian Pingan thinks of you, but have you still not come to understand what kind of person he is?" A resigned look appeared on Sun Jiashu's face as he sighed. "Before this, I thought I already had a good grasp on his character, so I was prepared to face the consequences. Even if he comes to realize the truth, I was prepared to compensate him, and the worst-case scenario would be a clean break, where our Sun clan never crosses paths with Qian Pingan again. However, I don't know if I'm prepared to face the consequences now because I don't know if Qian Pingan is consistent in the way that he treats himself and the way that he treats others." The Sun clan patriarch patted Sun Jiashu on the shoulder as he said, "Jiashu, you're very intelligent, and you also possess immense talent, so your status as clan leader has never been questioned. Even now that you've made such a grave mistake, I still think you're the best candidate for the job. Right now, I'm not a patriarch offering counsel and instruction to a clan leader. Instead, I'm going to give you a piece of advice purely as a senior to a junior. I think you should cast aside all of your schemes and disregard the fate of the clan and the state of Eastern Treasured Vile Continent. You are Sun Jiashu, Lu Baqiao's best friend, and Qian Pingan is a friend introduced to you by Lu Baqiao, so why don't you just try to befriend him on a personal level and think about nothing else? Will that work?" Sun Jiashu asked with a skeptical expression. The Sun clan patriarch smiled as he replied, "You may as well give it a try. It's not like things can get any worse. On top of that, some things cannot just be avoided. When you encounter a hurdle, there's nothing to fear because all you have to do is try your best to get over it. As for whether you'll be successful, that's another matter entirely. At the very least you tried, and just as you said, it's not going to have a decisive impact on our Sun clan anyway." "Alright, I suppose I can give it a try," Sun Jiashu said, but he was still looking a little hesitant. The Sun Clan patriarch turned to look at the sky outside the ancestral hall as he said, "Go. Don't forget that today is the day that the mountain and sea turtles set sail." Sun Jiashu took a deep breath, then departed from the ancestral hall. Even though he had already made a decision, his footsteps were still quite heavy. Jiashu really has suffered a terrible loss this time, the Sun Clan patriarch sighed to himself. He lost 3 times in a row, losing grain rain coins, losing a century of service from a guest elder with hopes of reaching the nascent tier, losing to the Fu clan, and finally losing his Dao heart. The wavering of his Dao heart is the most damning of those consequences, and if I were in his place, I would most likely only be faring even worse than him. In fact, my Dao heart would have most likely already collapsed, leaving no chance for amends to be made. The Sun Clan patriarch then turned his gaze back to the portraits hanging on the walls as he smiled and continued. Having said that, I think this is a good thing. At the very least, the consequences are not too severe to bear, and they've taught him some valuable lessons. It's never a good thing to have too smooth a journey and rely excessively on one's own talents and intelligence, wouldn't you all agree? All of the portraits on the walls fluttered audibly, as if they were expressing their agreement. Inside the Fu city, Song Jisun was constantly accompanied by the assistant mountain master of Forest Deer Academy wherever he went. The deal between Old Dragon City and the Greatly Empire had been decided long before Fu Nanhua entered Jewel's small world, and Song Jisun had only come to Old Dragon City as an obligatory visit to display himself to the outside world as a new prince of the Greatly Empire. He was doing this both as a part of Cui Chan's plan and under the orders of the emperor. Song Jisun had traveled southward to Old Dragon City from the ferry station in the Dragon Spring Prefecture. The emperor was still resting and recuperating in the capital city of the Greatly Empire, and he hadn't made any demands of Song Jisun for this trip. Hence, as Song Jisun stepped onto the ship, he couldn't help but feel as if his maidservant Jigui was the true focus for this trip. Song Jisun was aware of some of the inner workings behind certain things that were still largely unfathomable to him, and he knew that there were many long-running plots that were unfolding in the shadows. Ultimately, one side would descend southward, while the other would travel northward, and additionally, the Gao clan of Great Sui Nation had expressed their willingness to compromise and forge an alliance with the Greatly Empire's Song clan. In the central region of Eastern Treasured Vile Continent was Heavenly Lord Xianxia of Complete Reed Continent, and he had severed the control that Lakeview Academy had over the north. Even though the Academy had lashed out with a high degree of force and decisiveness, stamping out the stirrings of war that were beginning to arise within the dozen or so nations that included Colorful Garment Nation and Watercombing Nation, Song Jisun could still see a path along which the cavalry of the Greatly Empire could make its southbound march, encountering no meaningful resistance as it conquered everything en route to the south coast. Song Jisun could see all of this, but he refrained from speaking about such matters. Just because the state of Eastern Treasured Vile Continent was beneficial to the Song clan didn't necessarily mean that it was beneficial to him. Not only did he not have interactions with the most important officials of the Greatly Empire, he also had a twin brother in the Palace of Eternal Spring, as well as a mother who displayed a high degree of favoritism for her younger son. Upon returning to the capital city of the Greatly Empire, he had paid a visit to the Palace of Eternal Spring. It was customarily mandated that after a long separation between parent and child, the latter had to visit the former following their return. However, no matter how much sorrow his mother displayed, Song Jisun discovered that he struggled to reciprocate those feelings. He felt as if he had been watching a complete stranger weeping before him, but while he remained as unmoved as a block of wood. In fact, that was an apt analogy, as he had felt like a wooden puppet completely devoid of emotion at the time. All he was able to do was squeeze out some tears, and he had nothing to say to his mother. Their conversation consisted solely of her asking him questions, to which he would respond, and it was more like a stiff and awkward briefing between superior and subordinate rather than a heartwarming reunion between mother and son. On top of that, he had also been bawling his eyes out on the side, and Song Jisun felt like that reunion had been a very awkward one for all three of them. Song Jisun was walking alone down a corridor in the Fu clan's courtyard. He had expressed a desire to take a stroll on his own, so the assistant mountain master of Forest Deer Academy wasn't accompanying him. On his stroll, Song Jisun encountered many handsome male servants and beautiful maidservants, none of whom were aware of his identity, but the old dragon cloud-flipping pendant and the old dragon rainbringer hanging from his waist granted him free passage anywhere in the Fu clan. On this day, Jigui had gone off on her own again, and Sword Immortal Su Ru was also nowhere to be seen. It was said that Su Ruo was an extremely renowned Mahis figurehead of Middle-earth divine continent, and Song Jisun had always been trying to befriend him, but despite how perpetually pleasant and easygoing Su Ruo seemed, Song Jisun felt like he was very difficult to form a true bond with, and their relationship remained one that was pleasant yet distant. In his mind, perhaps the situation would improve if he were to inherit the throne someday, so for now, he would just have to bide his time. While on his stroll, Song Jisun was inspecting the surrounding scenery, which consisted of the immaculate maintained gardens and pavilions of the Fu clan, but it didn't take long before he grew bored of what he was seeing. Back when he was strolling through the streets and alleys of the small town, the scenery had never been so unappealing to him, regardless of whether he was accompanied by Ji Gui. As the thought of Jige entered his mind, his mood worsened even further. He was terrified that one day, she would no longer be his maidservant, and that he would suddenly turn around to find that she was gone. Just like now, as he turned around to face the empty corridor behind him, the only thing there was a parrot in the cage speaking in the dialect of Old Dragon City. Song Jisun made his way over to the cage, then tapped it heavily with his finger as he said, "Shut up." The parrot was an extremely fast learner, and it immediately copied Song Jisun as it replied, "Shut up." Song Jisun raised an eyebrow as he said, "I want to kiss Song Mu's arse." The parrot turned around so that its backside was facing Song Jisun, and it replied, "You can kiss my arse." Song Jisun was very amused by this interaction, and his mood was lifted a little as he departed with a smile on his face. The Fu clan had a dragon scaling platform that was a restricted area in Old Dragon City. It wasn't in the Fu City. Instead, it was on the seaside cliff in the easternmost area of Old Dragon City. The dragon scaling platform was several hundred feet tall, and it was the tallest building in all of Old Dragon City, but it was completely empty, and a golden courtier chi refiner was constantly stationed here, cultivating in a thatch hut while preventing outsiders from stepping onto the platform. On this day, Fu Qi was personally accompanying a guest onto the platform for sightseeing, and they were accompanied only by Fu Nanhua. It was strange that Fu Qi stopped at the foot of the dragon scaling platform, while the guests made their way up to the platform on their own. The golden courtier chi refiner extended a respectful greeting to Fu Qi, then took a glance at Fu Nanhua before returning to his thatch hut to continue refining his soul by sensing the ebb and flow of the sea's tide. "Nanhua, did you choose to refrain from attacking Chun Ping'an because you thought that Sun Jiashu was smarter than you, so it had to be a trap for you?" Fu Qi asked. "Aside from that, I was asking myself how I would treat this matter if I were the city lord of Old Dragon City. Would I use our clan's resources to settle a private vendetta, or—" Fu Nanhua's voice trailed off here as an awkward look appeared on his face. Fu Qi was very pleased to hear this, and he praised the young man. "Looks like you really did carefully consider the things that I told you that day. If you're a member of the Fu clan, then you can't wait until the day you become the city lord before you finally begin acting like one. If you don't even have that much foresight, then even if you're the most powerful cultivator in the clan, it matters for naught. If all you do is make rash decisions to satisfy your own personal agendas, then you'll eventually get what's coming to you. In the face of an immortal of the upper 5 tiers, our Old Dragon City is nothing more than a fart in the wind." Fu Nanhua gritted his teeth momentarily to muster up some courage, then asked, "Father, how can I inherit the position of city lord with my lowly cultivation base? How can I expect anyone to respect and accept me as city lord?" Fu Qi burst into laughter. "Just use money to get yourself there. Our Fu clan doesn't have much else, but we have a ton of money. How do you think I managed to progress from the golden courtier to the nascent tier? The amount of money and resources I went through are sufficient to purchase that entire street that the Sun clan owns outside the city. How do you think I reached the pinnacle of the nascent tier thereafter? Sure, I was pretty conscientious in my cultivation, but most of it was thanks to money." Fu Nanhua was astonished to hear this. Fu Qi clasped his hands behind his back, then cast his gaze toward the petite figure scaling the platform as he smiled and said, "While it's true that I felt you were a worthy candidate to inherit my mantle, her opinion on the matter was the most decisive factor in the decision. In fact, it's no exaggeration to say that she has the final say on this matter. There are some things that are out of your reach at the moment, but you'll learn more and more about those things from here onward. And the true scenery at the pinnacle of Eastern Treasured Vile Continent will gradually be laid out before you." A look of excitement and yearning appeared in Fu Nanhua's eyes. A meaningful smile appeared on Fu Qi's face as he continued, "Someday, you'll come to realize that the entire world around you reeks of the stench of blood." As Ji Gui stepped onto the dragon scaling platform, Her face was covered in blood, and more bloody tears continued to flow out of her golden eyes. She stood on her own, cutting a lonesome figure as she inspected her surroundings. The 9 continents, the 5 lakes and 4 seas, all of them were riddled with tombs filled with her brethren.